welcome to Streams with Djene here at Barnblog. And unfortunately, we came together for a serious situation of what in the blue holy fuck is going on. And I say this because of two things. I mentioned this on a stream that I ended up doing with Cosmonaut today, that this is the first time when I try to think about the rational calculus of the American empire. And I'm like, I know they've wanted to get the Iran regime since probably 1981. But this is a weird way to go about doing it, even by our historical norms. And it very much seems to me like the Trump administration doesn't have a plan that I can make rational sense of. The Israelis can't believe what Trump is saying, and he's divided his own base with this. It looks superficially like he really thought that he could do in Iran what he did with the Maduro regime in Venezuela, which means there is no plan. The Israelis are striking out everywhere to cause chaos. They seem to be attacking everything all at once. I mean, there's movements in Lebanon right now. This is also in the context of a Afghan-Pakistan war, and with the Taliban saying they would support American movements against Iran. So what do you make of it, Djene? You know more about the region than me.
Well, the first things first, for a couple of weeks, I've been feeling that this war is inevitable. A.J. P. Taylor has his book about the First World War. He talks about war by timetable. So, underneath everything is once you start deploying these military assets, especially when you deploy so many of them, I think at some point, although theoretically they could stop, there's a kind of a momentum that builds up. There's a timetable that builds up, and it kind of becomes inevitable. You can't just sit there forever with this very expensive deployment. And if you withdraw it, it looks weak, et cetera, et cetera. So I think this has been kind of in the works for a while, right? I think we've been kind of on this timetable, and this attack has been inevitable for a while. That being said, the night before the bombings, the Omanis came out saying basically the Iranians had made some pretty significant concessions, and there was a deal on the table which looked, like far more favorable to the American side than the deal that Obama had got. And I can't help but thinking, if Trump had got that deal, walked away with it, it would have been a big political win for him, because he would have said, "See, I've been proven right. I got a better deal out of them. I just, played a bit more tough. Obama was weak. He gave them all this money, and they used it all to do chaos across the Middle East, et cetera, et cetera. And, I've been tough, and I've got them to do this." So I think, he could have got a big win out there, but I think, the momentum for war was perhaps just too far along. These it's people act like, people using in negotiations for a cover for a strike is something unique at this moment in time. It's not. This is what the Japanese did in the Second World War. But it's like they've done these strikes, and it's an airstrike, a decapitation strike. They've taken out the supreme leader, and
there's rumors they're taking out the interim supreme leader
and the interim. But I don't know what they expected from that, because he's an 87-year-old man in a culture that reveres martyrdom. They take him out at his home. It's and then what's next? Did they believe Iran was an Orientalist despotism, and that you take out the leader and the whole structure collapses? Is that what was understood by that, or was that what was sold to Trump as being the solution? Did they get high on their own supply? Venezuela went very well for them, right? Like, objectively speaking, it was a crushing success. They didn't suffer any casualties. And in that sense, they were very lucky. They could have still got Maduro, but had 20 Americans killed, and then it, would have been a little bit more of a complicated issue. They, got Maduro. They brought him to the U.S., and then they kind of just bullied the remainders of the regime to kind of do what they wanted them to do. So did they think the same thing was going to happen in Iran? Was that the calculation? I mean, I don't really know what people were thinking. What were the war planners thinking? There were leaks that the military were not too happy about this operation, and it doesn't seem there's a clear objective, because the rationales have been changing. Because is this about forcing the Iranians to get a deal? Is this about regime change? Is this revenge? What's the end goal? The strike. If the objective is to take out the supreme leader and have a pliable rump regime, they're not doing it the way you would think. It seems there was apparently a strike on Mousavi, who has been under house arrest since the Green Movement, so he's like a reformist.
Does say they have attacked the non-Pahlavis of reformists, which are probably way more popular in Iran itself.
Well, even if they're not way more popular, they are definitely not hated to the same degree by large sections of the population. They killed Ahmadinejad, which Ahmadinejad's been quite critical of the current administration on issues of corruption. It's he's not in politics anymore. So,
they didn't kill the president, which is also a little bit strange.
Yeah, they haven't killed Pezeshkian. Maybe they're hoping that Pezeshkian, who's a reformist, will lead a rump regime. But it's just very confusing, because at the same time you have groups like the Mujahideen Khalq, who nobody wants the Mujahideen Khalq. Talking about forming a provisional government, and they do have militants. And then you have the Pahlavi restorationalists, and within the country, 10 years ago, the notion that this guy would have any base of support would be kind of absurd. But you do hear people, and nobody knows, I guess, how much what any level of support he has, but there is kind of an element within Iran now that is calling for the return of the Shah. And there's a couple of reasons for that, probably. One of them is just the sheer hopelessness of people believing that they can reform the regime into something a little bit less difficult to live under. And also a kind of nostalgia, because the generations that remember the Shah are now quite old. And what people have is, TikTok pictures of, Tehran University in 1978, girls in miniskirts. You have Iran International, pumping in pro-Shah propaganda into the country. And, that's obviously, some people think that's some kind of viable solution. Now, how far that, how many people in the country believe that, it's I don't know. And I think there are sort of different strains of it. The monarchists in the West are, very, deeply committed to the Shah's political project. Perhaps in Iran, you have people who think that it's perhaps just the only option that's on the table, and they'll take the option. I don't know. But, the Shah himself, people compare him to Ahmed Chalabi. But it's a very unfair comparison, because Ahmed Chalabi was a consummate, operative and, hustler, right? He was building the Iraqi National Congress. He took all this money. He was a corrupt guy. I heard a story from someone who had dinner with him once, saying the guy was dropping $1,000 on an expensive London lunch, it's no business, living a $200 tip, probably on the American taxpayers' money. But, he dressed up as a soldier, set up his kind of fake, it's fake government in exile, and actually went into Iraq with the Americans. Is this guy, Mr. Pahlavi, is he going to do that? He does not seem like someone who has been really seriously engaged in politics. He just kind of sits back and goes on podcasts. And even Patrick McDavid, who, is probably very sympathetic to a Shah-like political process and who's a very right-wing commentator, was skeptical of this guy's abilities because it's like he's like completely untested. He doesn't have serious political experience, and he just jibber jabbers off the top of his head and has this sort of sycophants around him who just yell, long live the Shah, Javid Shah all the time. So there's that. And then, of course, you have the question in Iran of all the national minorities. I mean, people may be aware there's a long history of Kurdish insurgencies and uprisings and unrest in Iran for a variety of different reasons. But this is not the only group. You have the Azeri Turks. Now, Azeri Turks historically have been, very significant in Iran. They've been, very important part of the ruling class. For the last 1,000 years, the majority of the dynasties that have ruled Iran have been Turkish. They're very well integrated into the hierarchy of the Shia clergy. They're very well integrated into business. There is their home region in the Azerbaijan province. But separatism has very rarely been significant in Azerbaijan. There have been moments, especially after the Second World War. But in general, Azeri Turks have been, pretty, at the vanguard of Iranianism, although perhaps chafing a little bit under the kind of Persian chauvinism. But now, I'm not saying Azeri Turks are all now separatists, but there's a much more serious political movement, Turkish national separatist movement there. You have this kind of Piedmont effect, right? Iranian Kurds looking to Iraqi Kurdistan for all its flaws. It looks a lot better than what they have in Iran. And then Azeri Turks look towards Turkey and towards the Republic of Azerbaijan, and they see those countries seem a lot better as well. So there's and then finally, another important group that we ought to discuss. There's also the Arab movement. There are Lurs, but Luri, there isn't really a strong Luri nationalism in that sense. But then you have Baluchistan, and of course, as Pakistan gets dragged into this conflict with Afghanistan, one of the reasons is because of the increasing strength of the Baluchi nationalist movement within Pakistan. This has the potential to spread across the border into Iran, where there is also a history of Baluchi and nationalism as well. So there is, at the kind of center of Iran, there is a lot of potential struggle to take place. And that's not including the regime's supporters. People seem to think that the regime has no base of support anymore. Now, certainly, the regime's base of support has contracted. Like the sanctions have done their work. Not just the sanctions, but also, the venality of the ruling elite in Iran, and the kind of growing inequalities and economic crisis, and the fact that many institutions of the Islamic Republic are profiteering of the sanctions system. But they still have their supporters, ideological supporters, people who are committed to the revolution. They have people who are part of the regime, even if they perhaps have more cynical calculations for it, but they have a base of support. And the crisis has reached such an extent that the situation for them is utterly existential. And they are the part of the population that holds the weapons and the guns. And so by assassinating both reformist and hardline members of the government, taking that, there isn't an option. There's no off ramp, and the brutality of the repression that the state engaged in at the beginning of the year has really pushed people into a position where, is this forgivable? So the possibilities of some kind of bloodbath are possible. And frankly, it's so hard to gauge the balance of forces especially within the center, like in Kurdistan, which I know better. I think for a long time, there's been, this like very strong growing nationalist movement. Kurdish political parties are being somewhat conservative in their approach. The objective is federalism and democracy in Iran. They're not attempting to create a separate state. There's a lot of risks for that. Even if people want that, the political leaders realize that will provoke Turkey, that will cause all kinds of problems, etc., etc. And I think these Kurdish parties have a lot of support in those regions. But elsewhere in the country, it's very hard to gauge. It's very hard to gauge and I'm not talking about the raw percentages of, who supports the government, who doesn't support the government, and who doesn't give a shit. That's going to change up and down depending on what happens. But like the balance of military forces. I mean, you can drop some guns in there, but unless there is a split in the armed forces, I don't know. You only need a relatively small number of armed people to maintain political power. It will be a bloody regime, but it could survive. It's totally possible. It's possible that you end up with a situation of Syrianization, where regions on the periphery establish some kind of like autonomy at the barrel of a gun and a rump regime, and you end up with a situation like Syria where you have a kind of frozen conflict that goes through spasms of violence. So
I am of the inclination, if there is any plan at all, it's from the Israelis, and this is the Israeli plan right there. I mean, Syrianization of the conflict. I mean, I can't know that. I'm going to go ahead and admit I don't know that, but
I mean, yeah, we don't know what's going on in the. I mean, you do read in the Israeli press, this case being made, but at the same time, the Israelis seem to have put their eggs in the Shah basket as well, right? There is a lot of unrest. Again, mainly, not from the Kurdish case. There's a lot of disquiet about, the Shiites, right? The Kurds do not want to live under a Pahlavi. The Shah people in the West and the Shah himself, they don't even have like 1 foot on the ground, and they're already talking about, ending the separatist threat in Kurdistan, right? So Kurds are not going to want to kind of accidentally bring the Pahlavis to power, and they're kind of a little bit suspicious because the Israelis seem to have put their support in the Pahlavis. I'm very sure, of course, there's some evidence of this. The Israelis are supporting, this huge propaganda campaign, which seems to be working on some people, that like there's this huge groundswell of support for the Shah. But, the opposition is divided, and there isn't really kind of a structural opposition inside the country. You have exile groups. You had the reformist movement, but like, who else is organized on the ground?
Yeah.
The socialists are all in Sweden, and they have, there's no, work.
They're all in Sweden, or like they're the two-day party. They're mostly dead.
And they got killed by the regime after they supported. Well, it's a lot more complicated, but let's not get into that.
We've already done that show. Someone said, why did I say 81 and not 79? Because in 79 they were actively trying to do it, but like 81 they started recapitulating, trying to do it again. I mean, it's hard to say that they wanted to do this when they were actively trying to do this in 79 to 81 anyway. Until the hostage crisis was resolved, that was all stalled. It was basically a failed Bay of Pigs. But so, that's why I worded it that way. It's not because I didn't think we were trying to overthrow them immediately.
Nobody knew the direction of the direction politics was taking in Iran initially. It was like a chaotic situation. I mean, even within the conservative Islamist camp, there was a struggle for power, which ultimately the Khomeiniist faction won. And the reason they won was because they were the ones who had some of the best organization on the ground, that they were organizing through the informal networks of the mosque. They were smuggling in these cassettes from Khomeini. You had organized communist movement, but they were much more under pressure from the intelligence services.
All right, this is a question for you, Djene, and then we'll go back to topics in the broader your political spectrum. Legit question for Djene. What are your thoughts on the so-called protests over the last 6 to 8 weeks in Iran? What percentage of it was legit grassroots versus a color revolution? And I'm going to say I don't think we know, but I'm going to say the idea that it was all a color revolution seems to be bullshit. If by color revolution you mean non-organic at all.
I don't know how you actually work that out in numbers, concretely, right? Because obviously, or at least from the reports we have, there were, armed groups trying to provoke. Those could have been regime people trying to do agent provocateur stuff. They could have been Israeli agents. Israeli agents have thoroughly penetrated the Islamic Republic.
And we know that because of who they got and how they got them.
So you have obviously foreign intelligence services attempting to direct the flow of events. But were those protests, quote unquote, legitimate? I mean, if by legitimate you mean were they kind of like organic in the sense people were really angry and this wasn't like kind of just trick? Yeah, people are angry. People are tired of the corruption. People are tired of the sanctions. And, whatever you ultimately think about who's to blame for the situation in Iran, people will blame their leaders, right? Like, even if it's, you can tell people, well, it's all the Americans' fault. We're trying to make a deal. So, well, you're still failing, Doesn't make a difference to me why you were failing, but, inflation is through the roof. People just can't get along. Like, it's cut off from the rest of the world. Iranians, it's like more and more difficult for Iranians to travel. And so, people were angry. And then obviously this anger, groups have tried to, take advantage of it. This kind of seems like the most normal thing in the world. Like, whenever a rebellion and a protest takes place, external powers attempt to control or make use of the event. How did our dear Vladimir Lenin get to Russia after all, right? It was with the support of the German High Command. But does that mean the Russian Revolution was a psyop? No, not of course not. There's always a game being played. The question is always who's being played, who's winning the game, right? Who's getting played and who's the player. So, I think the dichotomy, like, is it a color revolution versus is it, an organic protest, kind of maybe misses the woods for the trees and kind of underplays the example I always give is like, was the Haitian Revolution a Spanish psyop because Toussaint Louverture received support from the Spanish? I mean, you're obviously like not, right? But obviously Spain was going to try and take advantage of that. And that's all revolutions too. Was the American Revolution a psyop of the King of France, right? I mean, this is like a very weird dichotomy that people make, but it's one that becomes increasingly commonplace as, left opposition to anti-imperialism. And don't get me wrong, like, I understand like people's like moral revulsion at, like what happens. This is like a different thing, but like the analysis becomes, and tonight I don't really want to go into like the moralism and who's right and wrong. I just want to try and understand what's happening because that's really the best that we can do at the moment. But like people's like moral disgust for like some political action really shapes a kind of narrative where anything that complicates that narrative becomes like a lie or like a psyop or something like that. Let's take, for example, Khamenei being killed, right? Obviously, large numbers of Iranians who are dedicated to the regime, and not just Iranians, but Shias around the world, are like deeply hurt by, like deeply upset that the supreme leader and his family are being killed, right? And I have to say, like, he's not actually a top-ranking religious official. He's like only mid-ranking. He actually never got his top diplomas, but that's by the way. But he was a very important figure. At the same time, he is the symbol of a very brutal and bloody regime that has engaged in rounds of repression and who has been dedicated to maintaining a conservative, nationalist, theocratic regime in Iran. And people hate him. There are people who, like, if you've had your kids killed or you're a woman, you've been hassled on the street by you're not going to be like crying about the guy who you see as your like main torturer, right? I find it like very like people are very, most people don't really think deeply about politics. Most people are trying to kind of like get by day, and yeah, they're gonna be like not happy with the supreme leader, and they're gonna celebrate his death. What do people think is going to happen? It's because people have a fantasy that there's this kind of national unity that exists across Iran. They're all patriots and things like that. Well, many of them see this regime in a very negative light. And it's not because they're all like bamboozled. It's because the regime has like not done well by them. It's failed. So people really need to like maybe just like try and understand what's going on rather than, like wish casting. Is that the word that you would use?
Yeah, it's been weird because I've been accused today of being too soft on the Iranian regime because I think killing the Ayatollah is probably one of the worst ways for the West to achieve its objectives in some ways. And I also think that the media is running like a whole lot of Pavlovist as, having a lot more sway than they do. But the thing is, to some degree that's been effective. I mean, like it does seem like a lot of the diaspora at least is Pavlovist and some Zoomer, nostalgia.
There's some interesting trends. That has always been the hardcore Pavlovist kind of, Pahlavi supporters in the diaspora.
Right.
But what I have noticed is that people who were not that way inclined within the diaspora open to it now. They're like, well, maybe this is the chance, right? Like it's not perfect. We might not like it, but we're really sick of this regime. We want to go be able to visit Iran without fear of being, hassled or whatever. We want our families there to have like a better life. And so maybe this guy is the only one. I think there's a lot of you have the hardcore support, and then there's kind of a lot of cope people who've talked themselves into the idea that perhaps this is the only way forward. So it is what it is. Now, of course, many anti-imperialists will be upset. Whenever you try and explain something, they cannot seem to distinguish between analysis and normative points. I'm just trying to say what I think is going through people's minds. I think Reza Pahlavi is a good idea? No. Do I like the regime in Iran? No, it's a horrible regime. Do I think like blowing up all the regime members? Like I ain't gonna cry about Khamenei getting killed, but like at the end of the day, that's just because I'm a hater. But like in the broader political kind of framework, there's no reason to believe. I mean, it's possible you could have like a good outcome. Every so often there's a kind of imperialist intervention and a nation building thing that goes like more or less right. Like Panama, maybe you could say is an example of that. I mean, even Bosnia or Kosovo, they're kind of a mess, but like in the long term, things, you didn't have like an endless war taking place. The conflicts were kind of chilled down a little bit. But like, do I think that's going to happen in Iran? I am very skeptical that is possible. I mean, the country is going through a profound national degeneration. I mean, like one thing you could say about the reformist movement was that at least it was a future-orientated movement, right? It was it brought various sectors of the society together in the hopes that they could make the Islamic Republic less Islamic and more republic, that they could gradually reform the regime on their own terms without too much violence and disruption. And how has that worked out? It's failed. So like once that avenue has been shut down, and make no mistake, U.S. policy as well as the policy of the hardliners within Iran, who are in this kind of like dialectical relationship with one another, who feed off each other. Let's close that avenue down. So what do people have as a possible solution now? Well, for the Persian-speaking population, whose identity is fundamentally tied with the Iranian state. In Persian, you do not say, I am a Persian. You don't say, Ma Farsan. You don't, it's like not something you'd say. If you're a Kurd or a Turk, you would say someone is a Fars, a Persian, right? Persian-speaking population don't say that. They say, I'm Iranian. So you have Iranians, and then you have Turkish Iranians, Azeri Iranians. Azeri is kind of a long story, but Turk, they call them Turk. You have Kurdish Iranians, Baluchi Iranians, right? Arab Iranians, right? And then you have Iranians. So there's no, there's no piedmont for the Persians, right? I suppose you could say could all join Tajikistan, but I don't think that's like a winning political form. Tajiks are basically Persians, the same language or ethnic. So what is that? Well, there's the state. And instead of looking forward for a reformist movement, the only thing they can reach back to is a mythical, nostalgized picture of Iran in the late 1970s. Now, the reality of the late 1970s was not a land of milk and honey. It was a deeply unequal society, huge division between rural and urban, very low literacy rates.
It also had a torture regime.
It had a torture regime. It had, it was an oil state. It was, you had a really extreme sort of combined uneven developments going on there. And you had these huge growth rates in Iran in the 1960s and 1970s, very similar to South Korea. But the difference was that especially in Iran, the benefits of that really went to a very small minority of the population. For example, a lot of the money poured into the agricultural sector, it's my understanding that, this money went into kind of big agribusiness, white elephant projects, et cetera, et cetera. So you had a kind of really chaotic kind of transformation of Iran. And the Shah himself, kind of because of his own vanity, destroyed his own social base amongst the kind of conservative classes of the country, by attempting to launch this kind of social and economic revolution to modernize the countryside, which ended up, accelerating rural-urban migration, creating all the problems that we know, come along with that. Not enough infrastructure, people living in squalor, that alienated the kind of notables of the countryside, that alienated the religious and cultural sensibilities of the more conservative elements of society, and created a pressure cooker where by the end of the 1970s, there was literally no social base back for the Iranian, for the Shah. He was like a tick, a kene, as they call it. As soon as the nation moved, he'd just flew off the top. In contrast, the Islamic Republic has a deeper roots in society. It's a regime built in revolution, kind of baptized in blood. And yes, the kind of juice of that regime kind of gets weaker and weaker over time, but it still has a hard core. It still has some juice, left in the tank. It still has, people who will die for it. And how many people of those are left? I don't know. But certainly because of the polarization in the country, there is no incentive for them to kind of step back. People will kill them. Things in 1991, when Saddam's regime was ejected from Kurdistan, they murdered the Ba'athists, murdered them in horrific ways, throwing them off mosques, ripping them to pieces in the streets, because people saw what they did. They opened the prisons. They saw women and children raped and murdered, bayoneted. They saw mass graves. And the Iranian regime has done these things, right? They have done these things. You may say they deserve them, but people will not forgive these people. And so, it's very it could be a bloodbath. People burn mosques, right? And nobody knows who's doing it. Maybe it's the Israelis trying to provoke things. Maybe it's the regime trying to do that to scare its own base. Or maybe it's just people who have become so disillusioned that, Islam itself has become seen as their, the source of their oppression. So they attack the symbols and institutions of that. It's very much like the Iranian attitude to
Maybe
Palestine.
all of the above, honestly.
Maybe all of the above. It's like a lot of people are like, oh, like all these Iranians who oppose the regime, they're all anti-Palestine. I mean, that's not true. There are like, if you're like if you're like maybe educated, there's people aren't, necessarily anti-Palestinian. But for normal people, they just say this is a regime that murders us, and then they cry about Palestine. Palestine becomes again, because it is a key legitimacy, plank of legitimacy for regime, becomes associated with this regime, just as, being pro-Palestine became a kind of way, because the Shah was kind of pro-Israeli, or everybody knew he had relations with the Israelis, just as, Palestine became an important symbolic thing during the revolution.
The one thing I can say about Iran, from everything I've ever talked to, and I know many Iranian diasporites, I don't know that many Pavlovists. I guess I'm not in LA, but is that anti-Zionism is probably more popular than the regime there, and it was one of the only ways of getting outreach to some otherwise disaffected groups by the government there. But even Palestinians were often ambivalent about it. I mean, I'm trying to remember that his name has left me at the moment. Hold on. The author, Rashid Khalidi, thank you, was very ambivalent when talking about the axis of resistance and its relationship to Palestine. The other thing that we need to look, that I was trying to bring up earlier and then put it in a larger geopolitical thing within the region, about the chaos in the region. It is clear that there are other actors who want to act against the Iranian regime. It is clear that without sanctions, the Iranian regime would have possibly been at least a competitor to the other regional hegemons. That would be Saudi Arabia and Israel, and maybe the UAE and Qatar together. And this is going to lead to some things that are not going to go away very quickly. One, the Strait of Hormuz is shut, and they've proven that they're willing to shut it. They've already shot tankers. Two, the Saudis and I believe the UAE are in on the action. And of course, it would be now the Strait of Hormuz is shut. That affects Saudi Arabia profoundly. It affects China profoundly. There is an Afghan-Pakistani war, and the Afghanis are willing to side with the Americans here. And as we were talking, somebody was mentioning the Baluchistan separatists and the Pakistan relation to it. It's not clear how Pakistan reacts here either. Plus, there's going to be responses by Shia minorities in Iraq and India.
They already have.
Yeah, I mean, the Green Zone had Shias shooting Shias at the moment in Iraq. Like,
you have Hashd al-Sha'biyya and you have, the Hezbollah in Iraq. They haven't gone full tilt, because I think a lot of them realize, this is like. I mean, I think from the Iranian side and Iranian supporters have said they have been hammered. The Israelis have been successful. People can cope as much as they want, but the Israelis have just been getting win on the board, right? And maybe now the Israelis have gone too far, but this is a kind of existential struggle. Perhaps, and this is again just pure speculation. Perhaps Trump has totally miscalculated. How the Iranians are going to receive what he's doing, right? Because it seems that the Iranians can't trust anything. Nothing is worth the paper it's written on with the Americans.
Rationally, I mean, because the regime has tried to comply. That's the one thing we should say. The regime has actively tried to comply. The Amanis have tried to comply, have tried to help out.
They've tried to comply in a way that doesn't completely destroy their credibility or legitimacy. And so it's going to be existential for them. And I don't think the Arab countries particularly wanted this conflict.
No, I don't.
Now that the chips are on the table, they're going to pick their side. The Iranians have fired missiles at them. They're firing missiles all over the place because they're trying to, because I mean, maybe it's like a tactical question. They want to deplete the interceptors, the ability of the Americans to intercept these missiles. And
they've also seemingly hurt the Iron Dome pretty bad, and some of the American interceptor drone operations. I mean, like, what is that thing in Qatar that got blown up yesterday?
I mean, they got like the airports.
Yeah, is that too? It's the obvious stuff.
The only country which has U.S. bases that it's not attacking is Turkey. So, like, it is like a pretty comprehensive strike across the region. And I think it's like, I think from the Iranian perspective, they probably think there's nothing we can do. We just, it's just all or nothing. It's like their only calculation is that we make this as costly as possible so that we don't get messed with again. I mean, but I just don't know where it's going to end, because then there's no incentive. Is there an incentive for the Americans to scale down?
I mean, Trump seems to be signaling that he wants to, but there's going to be no way for him to do so if you keep having Americans getting blown up.
Well, the other thing is
calculation with putting troops in the Middle East like that.
I mean, but it also seems to me that the Iranians are just going to look at that and say, "Oh, he's just like, they've run out of interceptors, or like they want to break, and they're just going to use that time to rebuild the stockpiles, and then they're going to attack us again in 6 months, and we're going to be back to square one."
Also, do you see the Israelis letting the Americans back out easily?
I mean, this is the $1 million question, which, like, I don't think anyone really has an answer to. I mean, it's like, how far is this being driven by Israel, right? And I don't mean
that pretty far, Gene. I mean, I know we don't know, but I've been thinking about, like, the divisions in the United States about going to Iran, even though there's a large portion of security apparatus wanted to. There's also enough of the security apparatus that didn't want to, for realist reasons, for realist imperial reasons, not out of the goodness of their fucking hearts, that we didn't. Like, there's been attempts to build up a drumbeat from this war from various factions in American society, from various factions in Israeli society for all my life, actually. And it's not popular here. Even what looks to be drummed up polls, which I don't know how much we should trust polls anymore anyway. But even if it looks to be drummed up polls, the most any poll has said anyone supports this is 40%, which is almost just the Republican Party plus like 10 people. And the people opposed it diehard were like 39%. But then there's just huge swaths of societies, even in what looks to be doctored polls, who won't even answer. So, it's not popular here.
It's not popular, but like, since when, like, it's, I mean, it's, yeah, I mean, like,
the Iraq War was popular, whether I liked it or not,
and Afghanistan too. But there's been no case built up for it, and the rationale is not clear. Like, it was about nuclear weapons, but we were told the nuclear weapons were stopped in this 12-day war. But now the Iranians are coming back for the nuclear weapons. Then it's about ballistic missiles. But then it's about the Iranian proxies. But the Iranian proxies have been defeated, except for the Houthis. And then so it's about regime change. But no, it's not about regime change. I mean, I do not know, like, and, like, in terms of the Israeli influence, there's always this kind of Chomsky, Mersheimer kind of axis. Like, is it, like, America is like ultimately the top dog because, like, Israel serves its interests, or is it the lobby that controls everything? And I don't think there's a yes or no answer to that, because I don't think there's a kind of trans-historic Jewish conspiracy, to control everything. But it certainly does seem that, like, and also when we talk about, quote unquote, like the pro-Israeli lobby, it's not just, Jewish people. It's, you have Mike Huckabee gave a speech. You have the kind of Christian Zionists. So it's like, okay, the Israelis are pushing, but America can always say no to the Israelis. They said no to them in under
They said that
Reagan.
under Obama many times, honestly.
They said no under Obama. They said no. They said no under H.W. Bush.
But it doesn't seem like the last two administrations have been able to say no to an Israeli request.
Yeah, and it doesn't, and it's super confusing because, like, let's say you really like Israel, like many of Israel's actions seem very counterproductive from like an Israeli perspective, right? You have all this shenanigans going on the West Bank, and like it's causing trouble for like broader relations.
Well, the problem is, Gene, though, you're thinking that the regime people are rational in Israel.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
I mean, it's one of these things where I've been looking at like the stats about Israel's like Israeli support for all kinds of things, and the moderate factions have left. And while like I am not one to push transhistorical Jewish conspiracies, one because it would implicate me, but two because they're not true. But it does seem to me that like on the Mearsheimer-Chomsky axis, we're a little bit towards Mearsheimer at the moment, because I can't understand the American rationale for this. And it does seem like partly the political actors around the military in the United States may be stupid. Like I don't like. I'm being. I mean, it seems like maybe we should just admit that. Like maybe the Joint Chiefs aren't in control anymore. You got TV people like Hegseth doing shit. You have the anti-war people being sidelined. We have Rubio as whatever Rubio is, and a whole lot of the more sensible military apparatus got purged.
I mean, like this is like, for example, let's say I'm Marco Rubio. Why do and let's say my objective is overthrow Cuba and establish, American, hemispheric control. This is a distraction, right? And so, like, shouldn't the thing come from? Shouldn't the objective be to focus on like dealing with the nearby, countries? It just seems like a very weird distraction. You know what I mean? And why? One of the reasons I'm surprised is because, Trump usually seems to have like good instincts about like not getting into anything, long term, right? I mean, he'll drop some bombs. He'll take the gloves off. He'll do something like that. But he was running as a peace candidate. He was running against forever wars. He was back in 2016. He was talking about how terrible, Bush was, and now, this is going on in Iran, and there doesn't seem to be a clear objective. Like Venezuela made sense, right? You wanted to show them Venezuela, you want to show them who's the boss, you take out the leader, and you do something a lot smarter than what George W. Bush did, right? You leave the regime in place and you say, we will not murder you all if you play ball, right? From a pure realpolitik perspective, at least at this present moment in time, God knows what will happen in the future, that was way smarter than what happened during the war on terror. If you read some of the memoirs of the CIA people that were in Iraq and in Afghanistan, they were like, yeah, we thought we were just going to go in, take out the bad guys, and then leave some local militias in charge, leave the state intact, get the Iraqi army to defect. And, they literally destroyed the states and tried to rebuild them from scratch. They didn't do that in Venezuela. They kind of annoyed both the Venezuelan exiles who thought they were going to get reinstalled, and also the left, who are now going to have to suffer the indignity of watching the United Socialist Party of Venezuela get nasty and dirty with the Trump administration. And it wasn't the oil companies driving this after all, it was just like but this operation, like, if Trump's made the final decision, I cannot fathom, you know, what he thought
He's
was
just
going to
gonna
happen.
leave the regime in place now. Like, oh, Trump is being super clear about it, says our Platt sympathizing commenter. By the way, treat those cockroaches the way you should. Smash them whenever you see them. Kick them out of your events. Do not have any truck with them.
But what is he being clear? Because it was all about a deal, and now it's about regime change.
No, it's not being clear at all. And the idea that it was all this is just like helping the protesters is the same dumb talking points that people said about Iraq, which the Platts backed up to. So,
but no, in Iraq, that argument was plausible because they believed, right? Like, or at least big sections of the elite believed that this would happen. And we know this from the way that they acted, right? You know, like I spoke to these people like this, like they were all reading books about, about 1945 rebuilding Japan. They thought they could do it. Like, yeah, of course they had like economic and imperialist interests of it. But if it had just been a question of getting oil, they could have probably made a deal with Saddam Hussein on the cheap and got the oil out of it, right? But they really thought they could, this was like an ideological project that was about oil, but was about ideology as well. But, is this about helping the protesters? I mean,
no. Would you have bombed a school if you were helping the protesters, even by accident? You would have been a lot more targeted than that.
But like, how do you help the protesters? Like, like, it's not like there's an insurgent army launch, ready to go. Like the Mujahideen have armed men, but they're not popular. I mean, it's possible, but like, it sounds crazy, but like, who even knows these days? Everything's like possible. But like, it's just like the notion that this is about, like they didn't do it in Venezuela, right? Where they would be overthrowing socialism and putting, they referred to this person as what did they call him? The duly elected, the woman was the elected president. They didn't do any of that, right? So like, it just really sounds like maybe Trump believes he's helped. Maybe, like Trump's kind of like an emotional guy, I guess, like he, I think if he spent every single day with like Zoran Mamdani, would have like a really different administration here, right? Because maybe, he got shown the pictures of some really nasty stuff and it made him upset. And he was like, we're going to save him. And, that's how they got him, right? I don't even know. So like, but his, and there's pictures of him being mad at Hegseth. Maybe he's like pissed now because the whole thing hasn't been resolved, right? That it wasn't just you take out the Supreme League and then they come crawling back to you.
But the idea that when
I'm trying to steel man the argument.
Right. What people said, I said that Trump was stupid. I actually didn't say that. I actually was implying Hegseth was stupid. But two, I think we just have to admit here that like it kind of doesn't matter what these individual people think. We have long friends and we have short friends. Now, from the standpoint of U.S. empire, there's a long-term goal, which this is very much in line with, but this is a very weird and dumb way to achieve it. From the standpoint of Israel, though, maybe they want Zionization of the area with some rump Pavlovian machine instantiated in constant conflict there because it stops the ability of a less compliant regional power. The other things that you have to take note of is like this is going to affect the Chinese. What is something like 20% of their oil was coming from Iran? And this is people have asked why Russia isn't involved. Well, Russia one, Russia's
Sure,
relationship with Israel is complicated, and two, it's already in a war. So, like, I don't know, man. At some, we can still make the arguments all we'd like. I think it's very clear to me that, like, if even this was done out of primarily U.S. interest, we have to assume our elites are no longer rational actors. That doesn't mean they're stupid. It means they're degenerated.
Yeah, and like what makes me find the it's about saving the protesters argument like not even like correct on a kind of like, oh, they believe their own hype question, is like the approach of the Trump administration, where they've had successes, has been just to be ruthlessly cynical and deal with whoever with the big dog is. I mean, Kurds got sold down the river in Syria, handed over to Al-Qaeda government, right? But to be fair, from an American perspective, made sense. You have like your strong central government, you have your dude that you can work with. It makes the Turks happy. Issue solved. We can pull the troops out and it's all over. Bad luck, Kurds. Sorry, sorry to sell you out. Maybe we'll give you a consolation prize. You can have a little bit of autonomy, but Syria is going to be the way it is, and that's it. And we're done, right?
Right.
I mean, there's a rationale to it, right? It's like, it is what it is. You know what I mean? The same with Venezuela. Like, it's like Trump has a kind of like, why didn't we take the oil? Like, the oil companies may not want it, but he's like, let's get this heavy crude under lockdown, and it'll be good, right? And I'm not going to do too much faffing. We'll make a deal with the people there. We're not going to do the nation building.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
but this doesn't follow the pattern.
No, I mean, I was somebody said, "What do you mean that Russia and China aren't helping?" Their military help has been aided mostly in getting their missile supply back up, and again, I think that's perfectly rational. What I'm implying, however, is like you're going to see a lot of geopolitical dominoes fall that you didn't see in Venezuela. I don't think there's any way around that, and I don't think you can just pretend that you left the regime intact and allow that to happen. There's the geopolitical implications of this are pretty strong. And the other thing is the amount of misinformation right now is staggering from all sides because it's easy to manufacture. So a lot of us are going to be talking to people who are talking out of their ass. And I think we're going to have to be dealing with that for quite a while. One question for you is most Arab countries under control of Israel besides Iran in that region with a competent army. Do you think that's true, Djene?
No. I mean, most of these Arab countries are pursuing their own national interest, and not picking a fight with Israel is in their interest. They aren't under control of Israel. Saudi Arabia does its own thing. The UAE has its own projects. They advance their own things. Israel is part of the regional system, right? And it's a powerful pole in that regional system. The notion that like, it comes down to the kind of trans-historical Jewish conspiracy where it's like, oh, the Israelis are, and I think the Israelis play it up sometimes. Like Mossad is all powerful or seeing or knowing. It's a very useful way of looking at, it's a very useful piece of propaganda as a psychological warfare. But no, I think the Arab countries, the Arab regimes, the Arab regimes do what the Arab regime is in their interests, right? And Israel's military power is not infinite, right? They might be able to, do a bombing in Qatar or somewhere like that, I'm going to bloody bomb Saudi Arabia. They're not going to bomb Turkey, even though like they're having a tiff with Turkey at the moment. So that the military ability is not infinite, right? Israel has to. Israel is attempting this kind of rapprochement with Greece and Cyprus in order to contain Turkey. If they were all powerful, they wouldn't need to do that, right? So, Israel is a state within a state system. It's a very powerful state within that system, but it doesn't quote unquote control these countries. You know what I mean? I just think that's just not how things work.
Right. Also, when I say regime, I refer to our government as a regime too. Like the Israeli regime is the current government of Israel. Our regime is a government. When you elect someone, even in a constitutional republic, they constitute a regime in their government.
Oh, people get upset about regime.
Yeah, me saying regime, as if I'm like talking. Although we have our Rushki Mir fans here, so we'll let them do whatever they want to fucking do.
Making working with Israel has a lot of advantages for these countries. They can purchase the surveillance technology, etc., etc. They can don't pick a fight with them, but I just don't think that can be called control, right? Because when you say control, you imply that they're the ones giving the orders, right? But you have powerful countries like Saudi Arabia, right? You have the Gulf monarchs. They are dishing money around. These guys have agency, right? They're not quote unquote puppets of the Israelis. They're pursuing their own, what they believe to be their own rational foreign policy or their own, aggrandizement, etc., etc. And, in the grand scheme of things, they don't give a shit about Palestinians. I mean, I think this is what really people have to understand. It's the Palestinian is a big issue. It's like an important symbolic issue, like a lightning rod across the region. But also, a lot of Arab leaders just don't give a shit. It's kind of just a pain in the ass and an inconvenience, right? And that's just all there is to that. And it's not because they're scared of the Israelis. It's just what's the point? And also, Palestinians are trouble.
Although the Israelis do have nukes, and many of these countries don't.
Yeah, and they have nukes. That's true. But is that control, right? Pakistan has nukes. I don't think the Saudis are scared of Pakistan.
I mean, Israeli bomb Qatar and they face negligent consequences from the Arab regimes. I mean,
the Arab regimes will push back on them. They'll push back on them when they think they go too far.
Well, and also Qatar and the UAE are at odds, as are Qatar and Egypt, as are Qatar and the Saudi Arabia. Al Jazeera was banned in Egypt because of a tiff with Saudi Arabia when I lived there.
It's the nature of a state system. You have stronger countries, you have weaker countries, right? But that's not to imply control. What qualifies pushback? I mean, they got the Qataris got really upset about the Israelis doing that bombing, and they they got the Americans to intervene on their side of it, right? If the Israelis had their entire way, Al Jazeera would not exist, and Qatar would be cut off from the West.
It'd be also, if the Israelis had their entire way, Jordan wouldn't exist, and part of Lebanon wouldn't exist, and
they don't have complete sway over everything. That's.
Oh, I mean, I want to agree with this. Having all these countries fight each other while making off of profits is kind of the whole point. I mean, that is what a war industry and a military industrial apparatus is going to do. I completely agree with that. I think, I mean, we're always in. It's a weird thing that leftists have a schizophrenic attitude towards national sovereignty. It's something that we've always had an issue with. And I say that because on one hand, we believe in it sometimes, and on other times, when you talk about, revolution, what is that? It's nothing much a violation of national sovereignty, because what is a nation? Well, it's not just a grouping of people who happen to speak the same language. It is also a state, and a state operates under a certain mode of production. So that the kind of dual edge of nationalism is always something we're going to have issue with.
Well, what's his
Um,
name? I mean, like Marx, Engels, Lenin, questions like the national question, questions of sovereignty, questions of international law, they were always looked at as tactical questions.
right.
But what advances what advances the cause of socialism the best? Let's say Polish nationalism, yes. Czech nationalism, no. Right? Pan-Slavism, no. German unification, yes. Franco-Prussian War, well, whatever, like unifies this working class faster, right? Lenin, like imperialism was like a tactic, like the revolution's been forestalled in the West, and now we've got to look to these kind of backwards countries as a mechanism to destabilize the advanced capitalist world by cutting them off from their colonies and, like realizing the bourgeois revolution across this colonial and semi-colonial world. What it seems to me, especially in the aftermath of the Cold War, and for various reasons that go back to the Cold War, like questions of sovereignty, anti-imperialism, third world sovereignty and stuff have become points of principle. It's why, the response to Ukraine makes no sense, because it's like, so which principle matters here? Is it like national self-determination, that the Ukrainians should have national self-determination and be sovereign? Or do we not respect the sovereignty of Ukraine and think that the Russian-speaking population and the Donbass have the right to secede? Is Russia is our position defined by, Russia as an anti-imperialist proto-socialist?
Right. Are we revolutionary defeatists and think
So it
that all
doesn't make
lives-
it's like because things such as like sovereignty and nationalism suddenly, or at least at times, are justified as a point of principle, right? And not merely as a tactical thing. Like one thing I can appreciate about a good old fashioned hardcore Leninist is that they will say something like, yeah, we support democratization, but when we get to power, we're going to like disenfranchise our political enemies, right? We support free speech, but when we get to power, we're going to crush, the bourgeoisie, and that's going to mean, like things like that. But
we support free speech, but not for our enemies.
So like the point is, like for these people, like the liberal democratic struggle or the nationalism and things like this, these are always like what advances socialism more and what's more convenient at the point. But at the point of time. But I think very much with 21st century leftists, I think a lot of it just comes down to kind of like, I don't know, like anti-imperialism has become like the overriding kind of like principle.
Well, I think we actually can explain how that happened. One, during most of the teens, the left had no foreign policy whatsoever. During the early pages of the Bernie campaigns, there was a total ignoring of the U.S. standing in the war, in so much that a lot of it was based off of MNT predictions that required a dollar regime that in and of itself required an imperial stance towards the greater world to maintain. And there was very little acknowledgement of that. And there was very little acknowledgement of even what a left-wing foreign policy would look like, even in a, even with a lot of tacit, talk of decolonization. It wasn't that people didn't talk about it, but they're really fucking vague. And one of the interesting things about the Biden administration, it was a reminder that the military apparatus hadn't gone away in a very real sense. I also think, anti-imperialism is something that we can all support, but let's be quite honest, very little of us have any skin in that game.
Very little skin in the game, and also like anti-imperialism isn't inherently like left-wing, right? And like one thing that I always think about is like, because anti-imperialism has become kind of like, at least amongst some elements of life, like the overriding principle, where not all leftists, but like the anti-imperialist leftists, it's like it's the reason why so much of domestic politics is reflected through the kind of like decolonize this, and it just becomes like really like
symbolic universities.
Symbolically decolonizing your syllabus. So like, what for Lenin? Like, it's my understanding, and maybe I don't have this all worked out, but like the Leninist understanding of imperialism is as a stage of capitalism.
Right, which was an answer to the earlier. I did a whole history on the term on just the term imperialism recently. There's 3 parts in this series. The third part comes out on Monday, so you'll get it tomorrow. And I just want to say that, like, originally imperialism really did just refer to the government of Louis Bonaparte. And that's how Marx used it. The empire had a older, more a thing labeled with that we more think of imperialism. But when Marx wrote about what we call imperialism, he called it primitive accumulation, so-called. Lenin is combining Hilferding and a critique of John Hobson, the liberal proto-MMT or proto-Keynesian, who saw imperialism as something foreign to capitalism, that if we had good national liberal policy and had something like a Fordist policy, but this is before Ford, so it's anachronistic to call it that we wouldn't have imperialism, that this is just a bad policy decision. Which, by the way, is what a lot of MMTers today actually believe too. What Lenin was, in responding to that, Lenin was saying, no, capitalism will go this way because it structurally has to deal with 2 separate problems. And the 2 separate problems is the monopolization of capital, and that monopolization requiring increasing ties with the state. Yes, Virginia, we talked about this before anyone said the word neo-feudalism. And 2, that will lead to increased national competition between countries. For Lenin, it was specifically markets to ply your shitty wares to. And then as a side note, you get primitive accumulation. Rosa Luxemburg inverted that. And so did developmentalists and some third worldists invert that. But that was Lenin's theory about the time. At the same time, you had, well, actually a little bit before that, you had Kautsky's talking about imperialism leading to a super state.
Super imperialism.
Right. And ironically, Lenin seems to have been completely right at the time against Kautsky, but we did have Kautsky conditions during the Cold War. We did have something
within the capitalist plot, like the division of like labor between different capitalist countries. I mean, but the point is, that's kind of systematic view of imperialism. But we also have like imperialism, the verb, like doing an imperialism to another country, which I'm not necessarily saying is like a wrong way of using the term, but it's a kind of different understanding of it. And I think those 2 understandings become kind of like confused
because we use the same word for them.
And the other thing is, like, in Lenin's time, we're dealing with like formal colonies, right? We're dealing with society where like the modern capitalist relations have not fully developed, et cetera, right? Today, the nation state is a generalized political model. Most of, like, maybe you could say Afghanistan doesn't like have full capitalist, but Iran is a capitalist country. Like, if anything, the Islamic Republic has has broken down like what remains of the feudal political order in Iran. So like, these countries are all like capitalist countries in a way. Now, I don't know like what counts as an imperialist country and what, but imperialism isn't always one country doing an imperialism like through military intervention to another. Otherwise, how would Sweden or Switzerland be imperialist countries, right? So
yeah, I want to answer this though. Iran is a member of BRICS and sits in an important strategic place. I agree with that, and I agree with that. It hasn't submitted to Western domination as much as we'd like, although kind of wanted to submit a little bit more and still have internal legitimacy, as we said. Therefore, Iran delenda est. It's pretty simple. I would agree with that, except that the way we did it is not in actually it breaks up coalitions within the larger rest. It breaks up internal political coalitions. There's a smart way to do empire and there's a dumb way to do empire. And we are definitely seeing the imperial leadership get dumber. The other thing I want to say about BRICS, though, is there are more than one member of BRICS and is also a member of the Board of Peace. There's 3, I think. So I do wonder if we oversimplify who's on what side in all these coalitions. I've actually wondered why there isn't more pressure being put on the BRICS countries that are also on the Board of Peace, who have paid into that. And I do wonder about that, actually, like, because what's going on there. Now, you might say that's, everyone trying to basically do a Nasser, everyone trying to play the powers off of each other. But then if that's the case, you're not really dealing with an alternative system. You're dealing with a different block in the same system.
Yeah.
And
I think also the other point is, like, definitely we're seeing this shift to like a more overt multipolarity, but America's still a big dog in that fight, right? It's still, it's not like Britain. Britain is a small country, right? But America is still a vast continental empire. And even if its power declines relatively, even if it has its kind of Suez moment, it's still going to be at the table, as it were. It's still going to, like Britain and France, they really, they're really not, seriously powerful countries in the same way the United States is. If the United States can kind of like theoretically, you could do like a serious, you have most of the resources you need in the country. You could do like some kind of more autarkic policy. Like Britain can't do autarky, France can't do autarky. It's absurd, right? But to America, like whatever people think about, like, oh, American empire's over. It's like, well, yes and no, because like America, yes, is not going to, have the same autonomy to intervene everywhere.
Just the national resources, we could probably be a fairly, although not completely, because no one can autark us economy, as could the Russians, as probably could India and China. The multinational mega states would be the ones that could do it. And that's really what they are. I mean, what is it that the Dugan and the Eurasianists call them? Civilizational states. Which, is a kind of the thing that we wanted to break up in the end, in the 19th century. The thing that I think about the most here, though, about this, it does seem like, yeah, America as a fading hegemon. But you know what? The biggest threat to us has been so far is ourselves, our own decadence.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I was talking to one of my friends in China who's Chinese. And he says in China, they call Trump the builder of the Chinese nation because they're just sitting back. Why there's all these people pulling their hair out about Taiwan. Why do they need to bother? They could just sit back. Taiwan's not going anywhere, right? Taiwan's not going to be declaring independence. They can just wait. And maybe there'll be a time that the Taiwanese will just jump ship. Maybe there'll be a time where they could impose a military solution. But like, why the hell would they why would they like risk it all? And I think probably the Chinese benefit from having a kind of relatively stable political leadership, the ultimate PMC state, right? It's like the enlightened, I mean, obviously I'm being facetious, but it's like the enlightened despotism, right? You have a bureaucratic state that can plan long term, like they can, like, as we've seen, America can make a deal with you one day under Obama, and then the next year that it comes, the next administration is going to come out. So it's like an enormous amount of political instability that people can't calculate by.
Yeah, I want to agree with Bosco on this. The U.S. and Israelis killing is indiscriminately in Iran. It seems pretty indiscriminate, or it's discriminate but so wide that it might as well be. The political objectives and military strategy are totally disconnected. That seems to be true. It seems like Trump at least thought that this was a matter of total air power, You know, like, and I can tell you about the French who thought they could do that in the early 20th century. That's why the U.S. has already lost. I mean, I think that's true. One of the things I always think about this is like, I think about the Iraq War. The U.S. lost the Iraq War in the sense that it had no strategic objectives, but it beat who it set out to beat. Now, I'm not sure that's going to happen on Iran. I actually really don't think it. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not going to pretend to have any idea, but it's an interesting thing to think about how, like, one of the things that the Americans have done a lot after Vietnam is we have our military leaders have one initial objectives but had no clear military strategy for what to do afterwards, and ultimately lost any political objectives they could possibly have. And that now seems to have been such a long-standing pattern. You might even say it's fucking generational at this point. It's I think about, like, if you think about American military actions going back to the 90s, right? Like, which ones have gone the way that they wanted? Clearly, maybe Bosnia, maybe. And then jump forward to Maduro, but that's barely a military action. It's more like a military assisted internal coup. You know, I had some communist friends who said they didn't want to believe that the Chavistas had to be in on it, but, like, I don't know, man. I think they had to be. I don't know that. Again, I don't know, but it's hard, particularly with the weapons the United States was clearly testing in that stuff in Venezuela. The fact that you had only 70 Venezuelans and 35 or so Cubans die. I can't remember the exact number, but it was just over 30 Cubans die. Is kind of amazing. You had no Americans die. That is not what's happening here. Clearly, absolutely clearly. I mean, what they said, they talked about the 3 soldiers dead so far, but we haven't even responded to, like, stuff happening at stations, what the increasing likelihood of embassy attacks.
I mean, it's just a very concerning time because, I mean, like, look, even with the Iraq War, there was a plan, but the plan was
not planned, but there was a plan.
there was a plan. I mean, you have the situation. I mean, the plan changed. I mean, the plan was to rebuild Iraq as a liberal democracy. The problem was nobody knew exactly how to do that, or people rather had ideas which were nuts. Now, probably like the quote unquote missed opportunity for the Americans was when General Garner was in there, who was someone who had experience in Iraq and wanted to have a very quick transition and then get out of there and then leave it to the Iraqis. And then, of course, you had like this more expansive notion that no, actually, the Americans were going to go in there and like absolutely like decimate the old state, build the new state, and we saw what happened. You know, like they I mean, what people don't, you know, perhaps don't want to know is like, it's not that people were happy about Iraq getting invaded. Like everybody in Iraq was like celebrating, but you know, people were, especially amongst the Shia. I mean, remember, Saddam murdered like hundreds of thousands of Shias, right? They were like, they ranged in opinions between like, you know, we want to stay out of the way to you know, we want to, you know, great, we're getting rid of Saddam Hussein. Very quickly, they alienated the Shia population. And they very nearly alienated the Kurdish population by, you know, like talking some smack about disbanding Kurdish autonomy. And they definitely alienated the Sunnis by, you know, completely decimating the, you know, like the Sunni economy by like kicking, you know, old officers out of the army, doing de-Baathification, you know, like totally destabilizing the society because these guys thought it was Germany in 1945. And let me remind you, Germany in 1945, the Nazis, how long had they been in power? What, 1933 to 12 years. The Baathists had been in power since the 70s. They had like, you know, like when you deep, like everybody was a Baathist, you know, right down to different levels in the society, you know, so, you know, it was an utter disaster in that sense. And in Afghanistan, you know, like they thought they could like, I don't know what they thought. They had that lawyer Jirga. They like did all this nonsense. They poured billions into it. Totally. There was a plan, right? And a long-term plan. It was just a bad plan. Here, the plan is like absolutely weird.
It's incomprehensible if it exists.
If it exists.
And I do have to wonder if it actually exists. This is one of the things I've been really.
Sorry, I had to let the dog back in.
How many times does the U.S. need to go in without any plan for that to be a plan? Or are the people in control of the largest military on the planet just that incompetent? Let me put you. I did mention earlier that we don't talk about military purgings much, but in America we did have a purging of a lot of the more liberal leadership in the DOJ. I mean, not DOJ. That's totally purged and fucked. The Department of War. I want to go for the DOD, but the DOW sounds even more stupid. So one of the things that I've been thinking about, though, is what does that mean? The one thing that we often do is we assume that the Joint Chiefs are copacetic with each other on things, and I think we should be very careful about that. There often is a lot of dissension and whatnot within the Department of War, but ultimately, it often is civilian figures who make the decision. And it seems like the plan here, if we were to take Trump at his word, was to do an assassination and hope that would lead to everyone rising up. And yet,
He comes back on an airplane. He sets up his transitional government. The army and the Revolutionary Guard Corps, because he said this, will work with the patriots. That was his word, and they will have a transition to democracy. I mean, I guess that's a plan, but it's a plan which, like, doesn't seem. I mean, it's a
pretty bad plan if that's the real plan.
Because what if the regime doesn't fall and the Revolutionary Guard doesn't want to work with the patriots?
Like, I mean, look, okay. Do you think Marxists try too hard to rationalize things, and maybe we'll have to? Everyone is just stupid, not trying. I actually have a Marxist belief that we have let the bourgeoisie protect itself for so long that it no longer has external competition, and as such has gotten a really, really dumb. Yeah, I actually do think there's a Marxist way to talk about that, but I also do think, Marxists, we try to explain everything in terms of material forces, and material forces are rational because the real is rational, etc., etc., etc. And when I say things are dumb, sometimes dumb things come from very smart people. That's why I'm
dumb doesn't mean low IQ, right?
Right.
And people could be smart in one thing and dumb in another thing. Like, I don't know. I'm not very good at woodwork, and you got to be pretty smart to do woodwork, right? Like, so does that mean I'm dumb? I'm dumb in woodwork. I'm not good at it. There are things I don't know about. There are things I know about. Like, like the most important thing about being smart, in my opinion, that's what I tell my son, is knowing when you don't know something. It's like knowing when your knowledge is at its limits and you better be a bit humble and try and learn something and always try and challenge yourself. So, like, is Trump dumb? No, I don't think he's dumb. Like, I think he's a Philistine.
I don't think he has a low IQ.
But I think actually he's like got a very good instinct on certain things. He's like really good.
War isn't one of them.
But so like,
and why would he either? He doesn't come out of a background that would have had much exposure to this stuff.
He's a businessman. So, like, I guess when people say dumb, they think you mean low IQ. But it's like, I guess that's not. I think perhaps the better way to it is people always get captured by their own ideology, right? Like people get, kind of, they get into a way of thinking. Maybe they think, one thing happens, goes their way, and they think there's a generalizable rule from that. What was it Napoleon said? Don't give me a general that's good, give me one with luck, right? Like stuff can be to luck. And, if you begin to think like the reason you got all your money and success was because you were a super genius, at some point you're going to go off the rails. If you realize that, it's a bit of luck, obviously I got some skill, you can probably stay a little bit more grounded and not go absolutely off the freaking rails. Anyone can do it. So, like, the question is not low IQ or not low IQ. Um, it's the question of like in what area are people particularly like able? How about that? You
Right.
know, what are they able at doing? You know, what do they have a good sense for? I mean, it's like, is it? It's not something that I mean. There are people who are culture, you know, like very smart, but you know, are utterly cultureless or disinterested. And you know, there's so many ways of looking at it. So, like, yeah, I do kind of grate a little bit on the on the notion that like, oh, everybody in the Trump. I mean, who was it who was saying it the other day? Someone was like, oh, Tucker Carlson is a moron. I mean, he's not a moron. I mean, he may have really bad views. He may be really wrong on things, but is he a moron? He kind of
No,
seems.
he's not even totally a principled. He's just mostly a principled. But anti-war stuff, he's actually fairly principled after he got egg on his face over the first Iraq War.
Yeah,
So
so like, you know, what does it mean? It's like even with someone like Candace Owens, like, what do you mean? Like, she seems
you
like
got
a
to
very,
be pretty smart to be that peasant brained.
yeah. I mean, she's like obviously has like a real good like sense for her audience and things like that. She's also like deeply, you know, uninterested and like incurious and you know a little bit batshit crazy and perhaps a little bit sociopathic, right? I
Yeah,
mean, yes, you could say she's dumb in a way, but like it doesn't really make. I mean, maybe they
yeah.
are. The people who are really dumb are usually, you know, what they call the midwits, right?
Mm.
The people who think they know everything.
Yeah. Kamala Harris, people who go on, who went on Twitter and Blue Sky yesterday was like, if we'd have voted for Kamala, we would have not got this. And I'm like, look, okay, Kamala may have had a relatively reasonable stance when she was in California on Obama and making a deal with Iran. But it's also pretty clear she was signaling that she wanted to be pretty militarily bellicose on Iran on the campaign trail. The U.S. thinks that 8% of the population was ready to vote against their government. They watch too much TV. No one in Iran knows anything about Iran. That's why they seem so stupid. That might be true, actually. Here's the complicated factor, though. The Israelis had to have people on the ground for these strikes to be that targeted on senior leadership, and then the question is, if the Israelis know this much and they're telling the Americans this, why are they telling the Americans other things? And then you have to go, do we just not know what the Americans know? Are they really that dumb? It seems like the political leadership may be. Seriously, I mean, it's something we have to consider. But that would be, as Djene says, getting higher in your own supply. You know, that's like they will welcome us as liberators and actually believing it.
Who are you getting your information from? Right, you're also captured by your sources, right? I mean, the like take a look at like the power of the regime. I mean, if you're not intentionally doing this and you're listening to primarily English speaking people, you're going to have a different perception of society. If you're speaking to people from Tehran and things like, I mean, what made me think that these protests were definitely not some kind of manufactured thing, and B, they were serious. That was like a serious protest. Was not because they were like huge protests in Tehran. It's because in like bumblefuck places of like, you know, less than 100,000 people, you are having people being shot. You are having, you know, violent crackdowns, people pelting officials with stones. Like that, like, you know, like I don't think Mossad, is going to like, I don't know, Sadabadi Garb to, you know, like foment revolution, you know, like a bumblefuck town on the border of Luristan. No, I don't think they're doing that, right?
Yeah, it's like when people told me that Mossad was somehow going to St. George to recruit someone to kill Charlie Kirk in at UVU, a commuter school and not even in the Salt Lake Valley, by the way. It is up the street from me, but it's about up the street from me about a half an hour into Utah County before you get to Provo. And that they did this by finding through Discord one libertarian until about a year ago when he fell in love with his trans roommate, and that somehow Mossad was responsible for that, and that's who killed Trump. And that is widely believed now, by leftists and rightists, although Candace Owens is really the person picking this. And I do think we have to like ask ourselves, like, I was just on, I mean, like, literally, I got off, I went and ate dinner. Within 15 minutes, I got Djene. I was on Cosmonaut talking about the paranoid style in American politics and the problem with that essay. But also that, like, the issue with conspiracy theorism is that, like, a lot of the conspiracists by bourgeoisie managing their power through covert means is absolutely true. But, like, it probably doesn't mean that you're fighting the literal devil and that your answer should be to pray. Or that there's a cabal of Satanists who eat babies who also all happen to be in key issues of power, like some comic book. But I also, who knows? I mean, there's stuff in that.
I mean, I'll say with the Epstein stuff, you know, I always thought, you know, like, obviously you had collusion amongst the political elite, but, like, I didn't think it was like, it was always a bit abstract, but it was like kind of made it a bit concrete, you know, like the networks of power and links between academia, business, politicians, and, you know, and also, like, you know, it's like people know it's a Jewish conspiracy. Man, no, it's cosmopolitan, baby. It's like coexist. You've got Muslims, Christians, atheists, Jews, all together, just doing whatever they did on Epstein Island, right? You know, it is what it is. It's like, you know, like, networks of power aren't just like abstract things. They're like, you know, anyone who lives in a small town knows, like, there's the old boys network. You want to get a job, etc., etc. It's like,
and they do fucked up shit too. Usually at the local football game.
Yeah, like, it is what it is. It is what it is, as they
right,
say.
Yeah, Boscar's right. It's so much more boring and banal. I mean, one of the things I've been like, oh, so all the intelligence agencies were trying to figure out how to blackmail each other by promoting a fixer who used sex rings. How blatantly obvious that it was in every James Bond book.
It's true.
To be fair, though, I mean, it did shock me how much of it was, like, I had trouble at first, like, believing how coordinated it was.
I mean, totally that's the thing. I mean, I guess everyone's going to say that it was obvious, but, you know, that's the rational concern. You know, it's like InfoWars was kind of on the right track, right? You know, that maybe we were all too, like, a little bit disbelieving about, like, the coordinated nature of this, the way that this thing, like, how they really fix it. Well, of course, we shouldn't have really been spies. Shame on us, right? Shame on us.
Yeah. It should be.
It was all out in the open, man. Like, Kubrick made Eyes Wide Shut. I mean, like, you know, like, it was all there for us to see. It's just, I think people just couldn't, like, fathom that, like, it was like this kind of
and there's an ugly geopolitical history in it too. If we talk about, for example, what happened in post-Soviet Eastern Europe, it's all over the Epstein files. You know, a lot of the post-Soviet space, the men died for a variety of reasons. You had massive amounts of women left behind with social safety nets being cannibalized. And you know what happened to them? I mean, I pointed this out before when I said one of the most disturbing things I remember is the word for a Caucasian prostitute in Korea was Russian. Like, and it was code. If you asked someone if they were Russian, you were implying they were a sex worker. And I knew that said a lot about how nasty the post-Soviet space really got, because that's where that started. But when you started reading the Epstein files, I was like, oh my God. Like, the mail order brides were like the tip of the iceberg for how nasty this all really was. And that is a geopolitical history that's in those files. Same with Latin America.
I mean, and it's not just that. Like, if the, you know, like, to whatever extent some of the more sensationalist claims are true. I mean, again, we all shouldn't be surprised. Things like pedophilia, rape, sexual deviancies, these exist at all levels of society, right? This is like a pervasive problem.
And why wouldn't power make it worse?
Why? Yeah. Why wouldn't you expect that those who are able to, extract themselves from the kind of normal social order that may keep people in check, make people's worst, instincts keep them in check. Why would you think that wouldn't happen? I mean, the thing is, thinking, and people try to exoticize it. It's like my mom said a real funny thing. She was like, when all this stuff about the Muslim groomers came out, she made jokes of, if you lived in the 70s, this just means they've all assimilated, because this was like freaking common practice of people. I even remember at high school, there was these like gross guys, they were 18, and they used to talk about like, oh, we always pick up the 12-year-olds because they're fresh and stuff like that. Every level of society, this kind of shit exists, right? So yeah, like why wouldn't there be perverts? Or even people who just, like there was the Richard Dawkins stuff, right? Like, and Richard Dawkins was having affairs left, right, and center with women who were like perfectly happy to be having affairs with him. Like they thought it was cool. He was just kind of an asshole and a dog about it. You know what I mean? It was like like whining about like just kind of being a dick, right? Like there's all kind of people with power, like get kind of entitled and this, that, and the other. So it's like none of this should have really been surprising. I've seen sexual harassment in academia. My good friend in Springfield, who is a conservative, who is like a bigwig conservative, tells me all the time about the problems that exist in church schools, in summer camps, in he literally went to a different church because there was so much like scandals taking place in these other churches and so much hypocrisy taking place. Like wherever power structures exist, there is abuse. It happens, right? Especially in more conservative societies as well. Like this used to happen in Turkey a lot, but it happens in progressive circles. The Iraqi Workers' Communist Party in London were notorious for this nonsense. They had the Iranian Workers' Communist Party and the Iraqi Workers' Communist Party, kind of like a lefty cult built around this guy called Mansour Hekmat, an Iranian leftist who had been in Britain. And they would just tell the women, oh, if you don't have sexual freedom with us, you're a reactionary, and like kind of pressure women into doing things that they might not otherwise want to do. So like, oh shit, these kind of Bill Gates is like sleeping with, Russian prostitutes, maybe gold diggers. I don't know. So how do you even draw the line, right? Between, someone who is like straight up a trafficked prostitute and someone who is a little bit more aware of what they're doing and is kind of doing like the gold digging stuff,
I think we could draw the line sometimes, Gene. But
no, I mean, you could draw the line, but it's like a spectrum. What I mean is like it's like yes, you could draw the line between it, but there are people
right. I talk about this a lot. One of the reasons
rape is a clear line, but like also someone being a kind of shit person is probably also an issue as well.
Right. I just want to be clear that no one here is saying shit like the kind of excuses you see in conservative media from people like Megyn Kelly, because we're also talking about people as young, I think as 11 years old.
Yeah, I mean, so some of the stuff is really stomach turning.
I have been kind of going through a personal, like, how do you deal with trying to convince people that conspiracism isn't an answer, but of course fucking conspiracies exist. And the reason why I think about that is like, if you believe that like waking up people to the truth would lead to revolt, the Epstein files have gotten people angry on the internet. they've led to some political maneuvering. But we can't even seem to get all that done in a way. I agree. We can't even seem to get all that done in a way that's particularly useful. I mean, literally, we're finding out more of this shit from Europeans doing inquests than we're finding from our own goddamn government. And the damn royals seem to have more accountability than us. That's crazy to me. But I shouldn't have been surprised. I mean, like, I have known, like, look, if you've ever lived in a small town, you know that there's people who get protected by power that are disgusting. And I don't know why we don't automatically scale that up in our heads. And maybe we do. Maybe part of us knows that on some fundamental level, like, money corrupts, power corrupts. We hear all this shit all the time, right? But like, there's also a counter narrative where like our elites must be elite for a reason. And in some ways, those two tendencies in Western society, so-called, really do serve some clear material interest. And those material interests are interesting. One of the things I talked about on the Cosmonaut show in regards to the Epstein files and in regards to, like, people who believe like the working class are, as someone from a working class origins is inherently noble. Some of the most craven people who are the fixers in the society and who are the stooges, let's say J.D. Vance and Epstein himself, come from lower socioeconomic origins who are lifted up by some patron. And some of those people are the most absolutely sociopathic people that you'll ever fucking meet. Because that's an element of the story that I don't hear a lot about. Like someone like Wexler picking Epstein out and enabling him to get all of his money to be some kind of weird fixer. And if you know Epstein's origins, it's, he actually doesn't come from a very elite background at all. And J.D. Vance, people argue, J.D. Vance is not real working class because his grandfather bought stocks. His grandfather bought stocks because workers could buy stocks in the Fordist period. Maybe that's general Western labor aristocracy. You can call it that. I think that might be legitimate. But like, it was not uncommon practice in the 50s and 60s. And yes, it led to some very reactionary blue collar line workers. I think this is interesting because if you know anything about Vance's story about what he left out of a stupid book, Hillbilly Elegy, he does not mention that when he enlisted himself, he got lucky and got a non-combat position and was able to use that non-combat position to get in with a state senator who's pretty much how he got into the Ivy League. And this is all kind of a race from his own narrativization about himself. And yeah, he also stole valor about hillbillies. Most of his family was not from Appalachia, it was from Ohio. But
yeah, well, people get really too into the kind of like prole investigation. You know what I mean? It's like not all working class people are freaking the same anyway, right?
Right. Well, and my point is like the assumption that someone is going to be working class and that like isn't going to lead them to be taken advantage of is kind of absurd if you think about material incentives. Think about it this way. Who is the easiest to buy off? The desperate. Like, and Marxists knew this historically. We talked about it in terms of lumpen and lumpenization and all that. Like, those are people who are easy to buy off. Now, you might go, well, what does that have with Iran? What does that have to do with any of this stuff? I think we are in this time period where we have an elite that has fixers everywhere. They're relatively isolated from society. The public-facing ones are often common. You have people who are trying to sell this to you at all times. You have people who will take advantage of that. And it might be smart to trust the working class in aggregate, but it is not necessarily smart to trust working class people. And that's part of why this feels so hopeless, I think, in a lot of ways. Because who do we have on the inside anymore? I'm like, we don't have mass numbers of people on the inside of the military anymore. Like, that is one of the negative side effects about doing away with conscription. Like, you don't have, most of U.S. society doesn't have a stake in the game. Like, okay, what is the immediate effects of what's going to happen after the fall of Iran to most of the people in the United States? Your oil prices go up, the stock market gets unstable. That's what's going to happen first, right? Eventually, you'll start losing people on the ground. You'll know someone who got their arm blown off. You might have radicalized right wingers who sympathize with the people that they're attacking, and they might blow up a federal building, and like they did in the 90s. Although it's harder to imagine them being able to do that under modern surveillance systems. But for the vast majority of everyone, we're fairly insulated from it. We don't know military culture. I talk about this all the time to leftists because I'm like, I'm one of the few leftists I know who wasn't military, who actually has weapons training. And you guys talk about revolution all the fucking time. Like, you don't have weapons training? Of course we're going to screw that up. Now, I'm not telling you to go run out with an AR-15 and do something stupid because, by the way, drones, AI security networks, also that would be very stupid to do on a podcast. But I wouldn't tell you to do it anyway. In fact, people who tell you to do that are normally feds. The thing I want you to think about there is, like, why does everyone feel so helpless, and why are they all like, everybody's so confused, and why we can't seem to do anything about anything? This seems to be part of why, like, sincerely. We don't feel like we can trust the working class that gets out. We don't feel like we can trust the elites. We don't see any clear way to change foreign policy. We don't see, protests don't seem to work.
And whoever you vote for, you end up with Lindsey Graham getting a boner.
Right. I mean, like,
it's all very glim. This is why I'm apolitical now, Juan. I'm retired from even, I'm just here to call balls and strikes. But it's just, I don't blame people for being hopeless. And, it's like also people don't sometimes embrace the good aspects of quote unquote bourgeois culture. It's like, be a bit civilized, read a book, like it's not about your social class. Like, bring back some culture, like read some Jane Austen, stop being a Philistine. People are Philistines, man.
I will say this, Boatcar's right. This is why you organize this, to give people agency and to give people agency through power, and both collective and individual agency. This is absolutely true. It's harder to organize now in a real sense. I mean, everybody throws that word around, but like, it really is. But it's also, because it is, it's more important to do it. I'm going to ask you this question, and I said we'd go about 2 hours. It might go like a few minutes longer than 2 hours.
Sure.
But not very much longer. Djene Barton, go to the previous topic. Do you think there's an increase of likelihood of nuclear proliferation in MENA increasingly due to the war? I mean, if I was a country right now, my thought would be the only way to peace is nuclear armament. I joke, but I might actually be to the priorly crazy libertarian position that maybe not only does every nation need nuclear arms, maybe every person needs nuclear arms. I don't know. I'm kind of joking, but I'm not totally joking.
I think we're definitely moving in that direction. I mean, because look, how no one's messing with North Korea. No one's messing with North Korea. people have to be a little bit careful around Pakistan. And then if you're Turkey, Saudi Arabia, you're are you like anyone looking at the last 20, 30 years is going to say like, yeah, they'll get you whatever in the end. Like Gaddafi played ball, right? He gave up the weapons, and I mean, he was throwing money around as well. He was like paying Tony Blair's guys. They got Sir Anthony Giddens out there to talk about like how the third way, Labour third way, and Gaddafi's third way were like, whatever. They pay. People used to call the London School of Economics the Libyan School of Economics because they're just dishing out like a PhD to Gaddafi. They were doing what they needed to do, and then as soon as like an opportunity arose, they turned on Gaddafi. Like now, Gaddafi, he ran straight up gangster state, but like that's neither here nor there. You know what I mean? It's like, and people like was mad at him, like because he was kind of a shitty rapey dude, right? But as we well know, like the entire ruling class is like that. So like, what the fuck's the deal? You know what I mean? It's like, so they turn on him. Like Saddam didn't have anything, right? I mean, one of the things that screwed Saddam is that like none of the U.S. and British intelligence ever had like some concrete thing about WMDs, but there were always rumors coming out of Iraq about like caches of weapons of mass destruction and things like that. And this was because Saddam liked to keep it a little bit vague to the population of like, maybe I've got them, and if you cause too much trouble, I'm going to get you, right? The CIA reports were always like, oh, we've received this intelligence from the Northern Army, and they say here they've hidden some weapons, but we haven't found any evidence of it. It seems to be just a rumor and stuff like that. But he got gutted because he didn't have them, right? Iran's getting gutted because they don't have a nuke. And I don't know, man. Like if you're gonna, I guess life in North Korea is not particularly great for the population. So like,
it's gotten better. It actually has gotten better. But I'm not a DPRK apologist.
I mean, I don't know what's going on with DP. I have no idea. I'm not following. I mean, like, but whatever. It's like, it's not a regime that like the West is particularly fond of, but they ain't messing with it because there's a bunch of nukes there. They can't do a regime change in China because they have nukes.
That said, no, it's not an ultimate protection because you can do proxy war stuff.
You can do proxy wars, but like the Ukrainians can't, like the US can't deploy hundreds of thousands of men to Ukraine and then march to Moscow, right? Like they have to keep the fight within a kind of set of boundaries, right?
I mean, my thought is in this scenario is that you for nuclear proliferation or non-proliferation, you either get rid of them or you have to accept that everyone's going to have an incentive to have them. And can you imagine a world? I'm going to say this right now, where the U.S. had stayed the only power with nukes. What would have happened? I've read some of the literature between when the Soviets got nukes and when the U.S. had nukes.
They were like threatening nukes left, right, and the center.
It was going to sound like we were going to nuke half the planet. Now, I also agree with someone who says, one, it's not an ultimate protection, it isn't. And two, and this is also important, things can go awry very quickly. But things can go awry even more quickly in an asymmetric situation like the one you have right now. It is sort of like we could all disarm or no one does. That's kind of how this works. And
you could still get cooed.
I mean, I want to point out this way. I've talked about one of the reasons why BDS with Israel hasn't gone as well as BDS with South Africa. And one of the things about South Africa is it seems like part of how the Israelis even got nuclear weapons was through South Africa. But one of the weirdnesses about the George Herbert Walker Bush administration, who wouldn't even acknowledge that apartheid was a thing, I may add, was that they did talk for reasons of strategic, blah blah with the Soviets, the South African government into denuclearizing. I can promise you there's one state that's never going to denuclearize. Under current conditions anyway. And you know it too, because Operation Samson is real.
It's grim. I got a question. So I'm going to say, how do you assess the fragility of the U.S. and Israeli ruling regimes? I'm going to answer that as like, I don't think they're as weak as people think. Like, I don't think they're on the last legs. I think if anything, like the fact that they kind of you can launch a war when like nobody's really being primed for that war. And, like nobody seems to know what to do is a sign of strength. Like COVID, like everything freaking went to shit in COVID, but except for the Republican Democratic Party, we're still living the long 2016, baby. We're still living the same things, but things collapse really quickly, so you don't really know. But like it kind of feels like the emperor has no clothes, but like he still has.
But there's also no other emperor.
No other empire, and he still has all his gods as well, right? So now everybody can kind of see through everything, but it doesn't really do you much good if the state is still, and it's getting more and more powerful, and surveillance is getting more sophisticated. Yeah. I mean, I've done some work that involves doing research on political repression in Turkey, and anyone who's familiar with the strong state fierce state dichotomy, will be familiar with this. But it's like in Turkey in the 1990s, the impression of power, right? If you were a Kurdish dissident in Turkey, a high profile intellectual, you could get, a white Renault car would drive up to you and disappear you. They'd never find your body. You might get gunned down in the street. Like you had these kind of like, very violent interventions in politics. Then you had naked military power being deployed against villages and stuff like that. However, like today in Turkey, like the extent of the like actual violence against Kurdish political activists is like much
pretty
like
minimal. Yeah,
it's more routinized, right? Like you still have the violence. You have social violence. You have like the police don't do anything when like the grey wolves beat people up, or you get discriminated against. You have the village guards will like fight and kill people. But the way that they suppressed like mass Kurdish politics in Turkey was just lawfaring everybody, just like making endless court cases against them, getting them fired from their jobs, or like making it like impossible for them to get paperwork. Back in the old days, you could like, let's say you're
sound familiar.
Yeah, well, let's say like they have this thing called e-devlet. It's like all your paperwork is in a centralized system. Back in the old days, like let's say you're a troublemaker in I don't know, in Diyarbakir, and it gets a bit too hot there, you can flee to Istanbul and disappear in the kind of urban mass, right? But it's not really possible now. Like everybody has social media, everybody is tracked. Like a lot of these court cases against the Fethullah Gulen people were all related to like various communication apps that they used and things like that. People get pulled up for their like social media posts, and like, you have this endless lawfaring of people.
Like you see in Britain today. No.
So this is the exercise of power, and it's actually very technocratic and very successful. Violence, brutal violence, pushes people off the edge, right? And people, but kind of if you get lawfared, it's like it's kind of a slow death, isn't it? It's like it's so hard to like, deal with. So this is the kind of, I guess like my one objection to like all the right wing is fascist now is like, I don't know, like the expression of fascist political power was often through these like really these kind of violent interventions into politics and like this kind of imposition of a single ideology. But today, authoritarian regimes don't even need to like close down the opposition parties. They can just like totally just isolate or destabilize them, keep them around as the kind of people to beat up on all the time, never beat them up entirely, don't never finish the job, but, like make sure that there's always the enemy to go against, you know what I mean? And lawfaring people is just, it's so easy. You just get the paperwork and make it do endless court cases. It's like it's brutal, brutal on people. And that's what happens to people. It used to happen only really to conscientious objectors. They'd have like what they call legal death, where like you can't get any documents, so you can't get a passport, you can't leave the country, you don't have a proper ID, so it's a mess. And that's how they get people. And you can get more people that way. Like it takes time and effort and psychological strength to shoot hundreds of thousands of people. You just like make their lives bureaucratic hell, you're done. Stick them in a private prison. Stick them in. You don't even have to keep them in the prison for very long. You just keep them in there, rotate the people in and out. It's just so it's such a grim situation.
I want to pick up on that a little bit because I have been I've been interjecting. We're seeing more and more of this in Western countries. We are.
Well, they want to get rid of jury trials in Britain, for example.
Right. And, the way you can get in trouble, we all make fun of it, but you can get in trouble for social media comments in Britain. I know I have listeners that pick on Britain too much, but I pick on Britain because it's the former hegemon. And it economically overperformed for the 19th century. Even considering how much it lost of its empire for part of the 20th century, but it's underperforming today. Now, does it mean that it's going to crash tomorrow? No, but I think you see that anxiety about that even the Labor government has been using these kind of soft suppression tactics all the time. It's not just the fascioid right. I was talking to someone about, Trump and trying to take the elections a la Minnesota. And I'm like, one, that actually led to protesting that really did have an effect, unlike a lot of the other protests we talk about. And two, look at how much just two people, admittedly two white people being killed led to a major backlash. And like the people around that, who were really the bellicose people around that in the administration, they have shut the fuck up now. All right. Now, can you imagine trying to do that to 18 states and every major metropolitan area in the country when you could barely do it to one? Utilizing a military, not really a military force, a police force that has more funding than the Marines, but not enough popularity to even get enough people to run it. I think people then they're like, oh, well, they're going to shift to more smart tactics. I'm like, yeah, because if they're smart, the old sneaky tactics work better. That's how Democrats have always kind of out-deported, modern conservatives who run on this shit.
Also, and I'll tell you this straight up. Everybody knows, right? And this includes because, like the conservatives, that the Republicans I know, like the country club Republicans I know, they all know the solution to this. It's e-verify and putting CEOs in jail, but nobody wants to do that, right? Because, like I'm not saying it's a good policy or a bad policy or anything like that. I'm just saying like making it impossible for people, for businesses to hire people who are not documented in this country is an entirely feasible project, right? And you can put the fire up people's butts by putting a couple of CEOs so they are damn sure that they don't skirt the rules in jail. But that's not a politically palatable solution, even though it is the obvious one, which is going to deal with the issue, which is not the migration per se, but the demand that people know they can come to the United States and find employment, right? I mean, so this is all just all just like it's not even it's all smoke. I mean, it's like, why do you deploy to Minnesota? Like, it's not like all that. Like, if you
It
wanted
wasn't
to,
even subtle.
it's just a political stuff. It's like you would go to Texas or Florida, right? That's where like so many,
and that's also where ICE actually still primarily does its stuff because it has less political pushback. It's where the immigrants are. But if you're going to do a mass deployment to some stunt in Minnesota, it's very clear that it's a stunt. For those of you who are asking, like, if the Iran war is a disaster, and I don't know, man. I did feel like Venezuela would have more comeuppance, but then I was also like, there had to be more people on the inside of the Chavista government to support this, or it wouldn't have gone. There would have been a lot more. And while there still could be major fallout, I'm knock on wood for everybody that.
I just hope people in Venezuela can have a better life. It's the best you can hope for at the moment. Like, I do think there may be people who are subtly rooting for like Venezuela to go to shit to like prove a point, but it's like it's not gonna. It's like, honestly, like with like it may not be peace it's there, but like I would like it to work out in Iran, like, and not loads of people to get killed, and everyone to be able to like chill the fuck out, and Iranian people to have like a better life. I don't think that's going to happen because I think this is the way that the world works, but it would be nice if it happened, right?
Yeah, I would like Big Rock Candy Mountain shit too.
Yeah, exactly. Who wouldn't?
But if the Iran war is a disaster, yes, of course the Democrats are going to pivot on this. I already talked about this with Harris, like, in a way.
They're already pivoting on that,
right? I mean, like, I will say it is kind of clear to me that the Democrats slow rolled out this War Powers Act that they're talking about
100%.
So that they would have the fig leaves of it failing after there were already casualties.
Well, I think, but I will say this, like, and I don't want to be Pollyannish about this, but I think the tension with the Democratic base has become so great that there is a possibility that you will have some kind of Tea Party-ish movement.
I think it's very clear that that's kind of happening. I don't know how much it's going to ultimately matter.
But I think that's why I think there may well be. I mean, because one of the things somebody noted on my Facebook is like one of the interesting aspects, for example, in American politics, there isn't an elite level anti-Israel faction, in the ruling class, right? Or Israel skeptical faction. I mean, this may open the way for some kind of reconfiguration of the political elite in the United States. And I think, like just like the Tea Party blew up the Republican Party and ended up with the Trump revolution. Ultimately, it doesn't seem that that's made absolutely. We seem to be just getting, like George W. Bush again. But I think some kind of chaos. It's entirely possible that might happen within the Democratic.
Well, I mean, to be fair, there was already an attempt at that, and we called that Barack Obama.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I do think there's some very interesting politicians right now. I've been reading your writings on Zohran Mamdani. I am less sanguine on him than you, ironically, because I actually am into DSA. But I do think you made some interesting observations. I think it's interesting how much that's been able to be normalized within the Democratic Party sphere in New York State. Like, Hochul and Mamdani are not really, strongly opposed, even though there are some issues like the wealth tax are pivoting towards a broad spectrum property tax increase will be an interesting issue. And also I see in that, like, this idea that a lot of people had in AOC. But the problem that you have with someone like AOC as a counter thing, you see her in Munich a month ago, and she sounds like a 2016 Clinton staffer on foreign policy. She does. So, you know, do these counter systemic movements really change things? I don't know, Djene. I really don't know.
I mean, I don't. I have no idea. I don't live in New York. I have no idea. My observations about Mamdani was specifically about his style of politics, in the sense that he has seemed, and maybe he's a beneficiary of circumstances and the decline of anti-woke, but he certainly has managed to kind of develop a way of speaking that makes writers look insane. He kind of doesn't let him get sidetracked on like he kind of keeps to these core economic messages that he has. He's very slick in that way, like it's a kind of interesting, it's just an interesting way, because like even with someone like AOC, like the way that she can talk a little bit like you're in the I don't know what the feminist gender studies grad seminar, right? And they play that against her. But Mamdani has like a very like slick way of operating. He's kind of, and it's not by running away from being woke. It's by kind of just going like, yeah, I mean, like, sure, but moving it in his direction.
Yeah, I would say we might call him post woke, not anti woke.
Yeah, like he's post woke, and he's not like leaning into this very 2020 language, which was really actually destructive for liberals and the left, because if you're going to keep reminding white people about being white people all the time, they're going to start thinking of themselves as white people. And you can't make them feel guilty about that all the time. So at some point they're going to say like, actually no, we're awesome, and now we're stuck with all these people who are just jabbering some like really low human capital racial theories.
But I do want to say that I also think Mamdani is utterly recuperable, and we already see signs of that.
Yeah,
and
sure.
This is a problem though that you're going to have in America. People ask me about, people ask about, do you think the Republicans and Democrats are weakening? I'm like, well, the Republicans are weakening. They're losing a lot of people to the independents. The Democrats are weakening in that no one wants to give them money anymore. Neither big donors nor small donors. And that is a sign that something like a Democratic Party, Tea Party from the base, and I'm putting that in scare quotes for people who are listening later, is actually changing something, because people are voting for particular Democrats, but they're not giving the Democratic Party money. Yeah. That's very clear. And it means that money might not be a proxy for who's likely to win, which is also weird.
I mean, we had that recent primary where AIPAC dropped all that money and ended up letting the anti-Israel candidate in.
Yeah, I mean, it's
and they've dropped a lot of money on the main senatorial campaign, and it doesn't seem to have made any difference either, right? People seem to be in a very contrarian mood. And I think like big mailers, for example, if people are getting big mailers, they're like, oh, this guy's got all the big mailers, I'm not voting for him. Like people up here, because what the Trump revolution really amounted to, like concretely, was the purging of the professional class of the Republican Party, a lot of whom ended up becoming Democrats.
I mean, they're the bulwark liberals.
The bulwark people, who are always interesting to watch. Actually, I think they're one of the more interesting media channels to watch, because it kind of gives you a vector on lib brain, as it were. And the Tea, well, like the thing I'd say about the Tea Party is
it didn't change. It hasn't really changed the objectives of the Republican Party.
It's kind of just it hasn't changed
geopolitically. It has domestically. I will say that, but
and it also like reconfigured the party. I mean, like there isn't like like who's left from the old days, man? It's all like new people, right? Like,
Or they've kissed the ring. Like that's the other thing.
Or they've kissed the ring. It's like it was a real success in that, like in terms of like a takeover, right?
Right. But the donors of the Republican Party are still the donors of the Republican Party.
The thing about the Tea Party is a lot of people go, oh, it's all AstroTurf, but I don't think that really covers it, because yes, you can AstroTurf something, but it did there was the money and the combination of like some absolute like hysterical anti-Obama stuff did give it a popular characteristic.
But here's the thing about the Tea Party, though. The Tea Party's original origins was a libertarian revolt at the end of the Bush administration. And it changed what it was relatively quickly. Just like there is a big difference between the Sarah Palin Tea Party and what Trump is. Because one of the things about the Tea Party is it seemed very amenable to like paleo conservative talking points. And those were picked up by the Trump administration. However, and this is why I'm skeptical, guys. Empire still works like the empire. It's now dumber. It does it in a more stupid fashion, but it still works like it did geopolitically. And I was talking to Donald Parkinson over at Cosmonaut, and we talked about like how I said it's interesting to me that it seemed like the neoconservatives were sidelined, but yet their one foreign policy goal, their big one, they've gotten. And someone's like, well, they were really sidelined, but look at it now. And I'm like, well, in some ways you have the problem of you still have to get the PMC back on. You can purge them all, but you got to get some. Two, a lot of where the like business base of MAGA has come from has shifted itself. I mean, people need to pay attention to the tech moguls changing sides. Teal, the South African tech mafia, all that shit is actually a product of the Obama administration's policies almost directly. And they were kind of loyal despite all their weird right-wing reactionary crazy shit that they were into until relatively recently. Teal was the weirdo who went off, but you still have some of them that are loyal. Mark Cuban, for example, some of those investors people have gotten back on the Team D train. I'm not saying you can't change the optics of the party, but I am also saying if we're good materialists, there's certain elements that are going to stay. Unless you have something really big break that party up. And the last time we saw a major party shakeup in America that actually succeeded, it almost happened in 1916. That was the year that you had two parties get more than 10% of the vote, I think, or more than like most third parties historically have never gotten like a whole lot except for Ross Perot. The Bull Moose Party, led by Teddy Roosevelt, and the Socialist Party in 1916 did very well. But the other time you've seen it was right before the fucking Civil War. And that's when a party died and was reborn as a party from its own rump. And I know that's what that's the theory of the DSA has about how you have a dirty break or how a new party emerges from a ballot line or this, that, and the other. The problem I have with that is like, I don't 105,000 people do not overpower through just people power, will, and gumption and local dues. Billionaires, you just don't. And I do think we're going to see a change in the Democratic Party. I think there has to be, because otherwise it dies. And yet that would leave a vacuum. And one of the things is a lot of people thought the GOP was going to die after George Bush. They did. Right? I remember reading book after book before the Tea Party became, a thing. And my thing about the Tea Party is it started out as a rebellion against Bush. Its founders said it was astroturfed. And okay, so it was, but it still became popular in and of itself. Like I knew
and it
real Tea Party.
It rejuvenated the Republican Party.
Right.
it gave them more juice, it gave them, so something like that is going to have to, because like really the difference between what the debate, the base wants and what the party was. Now the Democrats are protected by the American political system. Like it's very hard for a third party to come into being. It's not like Britain. And Britain, it's difficult for another party to come into being. But that election in Manchester was like a real boot in the ass, and it's going to have a kind of domino effect, because it kind of shows that the Greens are a viable party, because like the overwhelming kind of vibes in Britain has been like the inevitability of the Reform Party. That's why you see all these Tories jumping to the Reform. Nobody wants to do what the Tories are doing, which is basically nativism, but they got a black Nigerian lady in charge. Like, this is just not gonna. This is not America, right? In America, I could totally see, President Candace Owens leading something like that. But this is Britain, right? Different. But now, like that's going to destabilize the political system. Doesn't mean that they won or anything like that, but it's kind of interesting, because there's the right is not, like the capitalist right is not as hegemonic, and this is a disaster for Labour, because at least with Reform had won, this would allow Labour to continue running to the right on the rationale that, well, this is the only way to win over the population. Now this has shown that people are like upset that they actually don't like the direction that the country is going in. So like, because like the Reform won loads in the local election. Like in Hull, they had this like former boxing guy who's like really does not know what he's doing. They had like teenagers winning in different places. They win, especially around my region. Like the people talk about the north-south divide, but there's also kind of an east-west divide as well. And like Reformed, like you go out to those places in Lincolnshire, and it's like the painting the roundabouts with flags and stuff like that. It's like, but like that's not everybody. Like Britain is also has like a kind of cosmopolitan middle class, and Labour just can't represent them anymore. The kind of a contradiction between like base and party. I mean, you can take it so far, but like at some point something's got to break, because you still have formal elections, right? And in America, in Britain, it's a lot easier for the Labour Party to like manage the internal selection process. Like they didn't, the mayor of Manchester, who's relatively popular, wasn't allowed to run, and Starmer purged the party. You can't really do that in America, because you have this open primary process, so you can influence it directly, but like you slip up and you end up with what happened to Joe Crowley, right? Or what happened to this like, and if people are in a real pissed off mood, right, there's going to be some weird shit happening, right? You're going to have weird kind of stuff going on. You're going to have people who are going to be recuperated to a degree, but there will have to be some kind of reformulation of what they're going. I mean, like they're going to have to deliver something. You know what I mean? Like one thing. You know what I mean? That I don't know. I don't know what you think, Vaughn.
I mean, I'm not a specialist in UK politics, and everyone knows how I feel about the English, but and I don't actually hate the English. I want to be very clear on that. Although I do like the joke that I do. Two,
but in America, yeah,
in America, I don't see how there's not internal revolts everywhere. The thing is, it's not clear what side. Because if you look at like who are the major voices revitalizing the Democratic Party right now, it's the normie progressives that their media constellation is Midas Tusk. It's the ex-Republicans that's the Bulwark people. It's the DSA, which is kind of actually an older faction at this point, which is really strong in two areas, New York and California, but not really strong nationally. It can revitalize some urban politics, but it does seem to me like what we learned with the squad is it got a lot of people to have a lot of hope, and yet there wasn't
A wave.
A wave that really changed the Democratic Party in any significant amount because the Biden administration was able to co-opt that. And it was the DSA electeds that were the strongest Bidenist, even after, with the exception of Rashida Tlaib. I want to give Tlaib, we'll separate her out, and maybe Ilhan Omar. But if you look at like Bernie and AOC, they endorsed Biden prematurely. I find this, I do think there can be a major shift in the Democratic Party. I do actually, but I don't think it's known. The thing about the Tea Party also is the Tea Party as it existed in the anti-Obama period is not exactly what won out. It just got rid of most of the old guard in the GOP. Because Trump was not part of that initially, and he kind of wasn't part of, like, Michelle Bachmann and Sarah Palin were not the equivalent to Marjorie Taylor Greene before Trump too. They weren't.
They were proto Marjorie Taylor Greene.
They were proto that, but they weren't that. But what we saw happen is the neoconservatives split off into different directions and went into different groupings. A lot of them went into the Democrats. Some of them have even become Israel skeptic. It's weird. But then you have the libertarians. Well, what happened to them? So they have kind of come back as opponents of Trump the way they were during the Bush administration, opponents of the internal opposition to George Bush, but they're mostly gone. Almost nobody believes in that shit in the same way anymore. Even the ones that are still loyal aren't the kind of libertarians that existed in the aughts.
And then you have Thomas Massey,
like
the one, like he's like the only one left, isn't he?
Yeah, kind of.
I guess.
And the Kentucky delegation itself has a kind of weird relationship there because they've been disproportionately hurt. But Varn, what do you think of Entergy bowing out? Is it because she just got her bag? I actually think it's partly that, but I also think it's partly she might be sincere. Like, which I know is hard for us to believe that a conservative weirdo is ever sincere about anything. But
then, like, I think like the issue is, Vaughn, and maybe I'm wrong, is like I don't know if so many left people, especially in the big cities, really know people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, like the true believers, but like everybody around here is like this. And they believe the shit, right? They believe it, right? And you can tell them all kinds of things, and they'll say like, well, that's my opinion. And it's like, case closed. Like, can't even challenge it. They have to come to that realization. But like, do they believe like there's like, I don't know, like Tom Hanks is eating children? Yeah,
probably.
They believe that. And I believe Marjorie Taylor Greene is what is the saying? It was like a conservative is a liberal who's been hit by real life. You know, it's like that's what's happened to Marjorie Taylor Greene, and it's like real life hit her in the face real freaking hard, and she's like, wait a second, and it's not to do with like a come to Jesus moment. It's just like personally, it just became super, like the contradiction became too much, right? You can't make your whole identity based on crushing the pedo elite, and then when the pedo elite, day comes, your guy is not giving you the pedo elite. It's like, no, what's going on? And it breaks the brain. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I have no idea where she's gonna go. I actually am kind of glad she seemingly stepped out of politics and it's just now.
Hey, look, that's the most honorable exit for her, to be fair.
Yeah, I mean, like it means that she was somewhat sincere. We'll see if she tries to run for governor in Georgia, but doesn't look like it.
Incoherent can be sincere. In fact,
absolutely,
like, the most incoherent people are usually the most sincere.
I think when it comes to some of these other things, I have no idea what we're going to see. And I mean, to tie it back to the Iran thing, MTG's been fairly good on this. She's horrified by this war. At least if her public statements seem to be consistent with that. Anyway, I don't know what's in her heart. I don't know in anybody's heart. But do I trust MTG? Not really. I mean, but it doesn't really matter. She's out of politics. I don't have to worry about it. And honestly, also, I couldn't vote for her anyway. I live in Utah. Like, I mean, she is from my home state, but no, I'm originally from Georgia. But actually, she's not from my region. Anyway, she wasn't representing my region of the state anyhow. So she represents the tip of Appalachia and the rich white flight people outside of Atlanta who not just left Atlanta but left the suburbs of Atlanta because it got too cosmopolitan. My city is actually a Democratic city, my home city. I'm not gonna praise the Democrats there; they kind of suck, but like nonetheless, I think one of the things that I found so weird about Marxists today, and I say this as one, is how many people are get really invested in like tailing something, and I'm just not interested in that. And someone's asking, are we neutral? I would not say I am neutral. I am a socialist. My job, however, as a educator on the internet is to be as objective with it separating out when something is my opinion as I can. I'm not always good at it. I clearly don't communicate things well. So one time I said that, the UK economy is fucked, and people are like, you think that, that the UK is going to collapse? Like, no, I don't. I think that you're in managed decline and there's no clear way out, and it's going to get very tight. And the reason why I brought it up was to point out that there was a lot of things that Corbyn was trying to advocate for back in the day that really was based on the assumption that the UK was going to be a rising industrial economy. And that's not where they currently are. And
everything's run down. I was in Doncaster, and like Doncaster's never been particularly amazing, but it was like really run down last time I was in Doncaster. And I was like, this is like a big rail hub. You'd expect to do something nice by the railway station. There must be no money. The only place that has got nicer is central London. Like King's Cross is really nice because I always go through King's Cross when I'm going home. And they got like a market there. There's like a little park. We've got ice cream van. It's nice, right? It's it reminds me of Peripheral. I don't know if you know the book Peripheral, the TV series Peripheral. It's like it's nice and it's nice, but it's like King's Cross used to be like a dump. Like I nearly got like murdered down there so many times, and there used to be crackheads everywhere. But now it's like fancy as hell. They've got the Eurostar, right? But then like you get into and it's every year everything like they build some new stuff and it's all right, but then like every year like everything else is getting run down. Like the Princess Key shopping center
in America too, actually. Like, but I was somebody was like, oh, you talk about UK's GDP. Yeah, the UK's GDP is not that bad compared to Ireland, and I was like, GDP per capita, not GDP in general, because the UK is still a fairly populous country. But the GDP per capita right now, and it's not a perfect measurement, and there's all kinds of flaws with this. I want to make it very clear that I'm not delusional about this, but is half of the GDP per capita of Ireland. Now, Ireland's a much smaller country. It has a much smaller national GDP overall. And yes, there's rich people in Ireland who are dragging that up. But that's shocking. If I'd have said that in even 2012, that's where the UK would be, I wouldn't have believed me. And I've never been inclined. Like, I am not an Anglophile. I will totally admit that.
I mean, the thing is, it's because like whatever these arguments are, it's like it's just a fact that like pulling out of the EU was not great for the economy. It's like you could you could do all the like
it accelerated an already dangerous decline.
Yeah, it's like you could do all this sovereignty stuff. It's like, yeah, okay, that's fine. Or like Brussels is unelected bureaucrats. I mean, yeah, you're just exchanging one set of unelected bureaucrats for another set of unelected bureaucrats. But whatever, it's like, yeah, it's running the country into the dirt, and people know that, right? People freaking know it. Like everybody knows they got lied to. It was all bullshit. There was never going to be a Lexit, and it's like it's not a defense of the EU. It's just like that's what happened.
No.
Right?
And so that slow burn is happening slower in the EU. I mean, we've seen what's happening with Germany. We've known about what's happening with France. We know about youth unemployment rates in the EU. I don't want to make it seem like Britain's somehow specially fucked. And I actually want to talk about the United States for a second. If you're on I don't know if you've ever done Just Djene, but if you've driven from coast to coast and you go from like the older parts of the United States to the newer parts out west, the older parts of the United States are run the fuck down.
Oh, like you can see this in Missouri because St. Louis is. I always say St. Louis looks like a city in England because there's a lot of brick, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, and that's run down as fuck. Now, I haven't been all around Kansas City, but you go to Kansas City, it's like it's Art Deco and it's like very Batman, and I think they have a lot of finance centers there, so it's like. It's like nicer. The downtown is like nicer, way nicer.
Yeah, Salt Lake. The suburbs are shittier than the downtown, but I will admit, Salt Lake, like Utah in general, is relatively newly, relatively entered the economic. It quit being a weird Mormon backwater in the 80s. Let me rephrase. I'm just gonna be direct about it. And so everything's new here. Similar to California, everything's new. Although California is just overrun with like homeless people. Like that's not fake, guys. It really isn't. Like,
yeah, they don't know what to do with all these homeless people. And it's like, and it's not, and it's like when people talk about homeless people, the crackheads on the street are the tip of the iceberg because most homeless people are in their cars.
Right. I was about to say, like, what is it? Something like in California, like 1 in 3 homeless people have jobs. Like it's which is also mean why California, even though its property values continue to go up and up somehow. I was arguing with a friend of mine from Oakland where I was like, I don't want the United States to become California, even if I wasn't socialist. And he was like, well, but it's not that bad. The property values keep going up. I'm like, but you're also hemorrhaging people like crazy. You basically are becoming the upper middle class and higher, and then people too poor to leave.
It's like Brazil,
right? Like, yeah, I'm like, yeah. I mean, like it's our. I remember this about Guatemala City. It's like K-shaped economy everywhere, and I point that out because that's what the Democrats have done too. The K-shaped economy is not just a Trump phenomenon, although he's accelerated it dramatically. And people are like, oh well, Biden almost fixed the economy, but. Like, you don't know what would have happened under the Biden presidency. I actually think that we've been gaslit about the economy on stats for a long time because people are looking at the GDP and the GDP is increasingly juked by stock buybacks and like circular money flowing in that was allowed back into the country from it being stored offshore in the Cayman Islands that Trump allowed in 2019, which juked everyone's GDP.
And also America is really weird in terms of its size.
Oh yeah,
I get paid considerably less than someone doing an equivalent job in New York City,
but you probably have an easier lifestyle.
I have not only do I have everything cheaper, I have more disposable income because all that money is going into like bullshit rent.
I mean, like even here, like. I live in a place that used to be about the equivalent to Missouri. Like when I moved here, I've only been, for those of you who don't know the whole Barn story, I've only been back in the United States for 9 years. All right. I was gone for a decade. And
hanging out with my homie Michael.
Could you elaborate on declining empires leading into financialization? I can suggest a book. And I actually think everybody leads into financialization once empires start reaching their productive capacity, because it's a way to generate currency. But you have to have something to back that currency up in production. Now, the United States is still a fairly productive economy, but it is actually, our attempt to reshore things is making it less productive, like dramatically less productive. But we were still number 2 behind China. China's the most productive economy in the world. But financialization is a way to drum up the appearance of profits when profit rates get super low. And I know that people on the left, even left economists, will say, well, profit rates are fine. I'm like, no, you're confusing revenues and profit rates. Profit rates are the thing that the GDP actually tells you something about. And it's a proxy to it because there's all kinds of bullshit that can juke the GDP, but there's no Western country that can get its GDP like above like 5 or 6% on a great year. And if you look at it, it's more usually like 1.5, something like that.
And when they do this big growth rates, it's usually because they like totally crashed the economy and it's coming back.
Right, exactly. Or it's like, I don't know, you have a massive AI bubble, which I also don't think it's just going to pop overnight before people freak out and say that I'm predicting a 2007 crash. I'm not. I think this leads us to financialization as a way to get profits, but the problem with financialization is that it really does tie economics back into the state in a big way. You cannot hold monopoly IPs and all that and let the state be involved in the economy, which also means that the state's going to pick winners and losers a lot more. And we saw that. That's what I meant by like the tech oligarchs were largely a product of the Obama administration. And they might go back to the Democrats. This stuff with Claude, as Swamp Malice in the chat said a while back, might be a bridge too far for a lot of them. I don't know if it will be for Thiel and Musk. Who knows? But Musk likes to pretend to be mad at the administration and still cooperate with them all the time. And maybe he's really mad, but he still ultimately cooperates with them. It is interesting that the bifurcated economy does show sharper class divisions. It also probably isn't very good for long-term capitalist growth. The economies that are bifurcated like that tend to stagnate overall pretty strongly. That's why I mentioned like Guatemala City or like, Brazil and and like the urban areas. It's a gross thing. One of the things I think about financialization that Lenin may have been right about is it does increase international competition, but it also increases international ties. And I think you see that in the total incoherence of the Trump administration on things like Greenland. Like, on one hand, you have more international tensions between the U.S. and its allies. Allies in quotation marks. On the other hand, it does seem like Capital got really pissed off and actually stumped Trump for doing anything in Greenland, even if he got some concessions that he supposedly wanted. So this is kind of this dual edge of finance capital. Empires need finance because otherwise they have to back the currency up with something more tangible than that. And you're like, what do you mean they need finance? Like the reason why people care about the bond market is like, what two things hold up the American economy? Why can they consume more than they produce? Why can we consume more than we produce? Right? It's guns and the bond market. And even a lot of the left, like the broad left, doesn't like me talking about this because they'll say like, oh, the bond market's just a political thing. It doesn't matter. The bond market is why MMT, like modern monetary theory, can apply beyond a country's borders. Otherwise, the whole schema of like MMT currency stuff is backed up only by internal promises and the ability to tax. If you can't tax a person, you can't actually maintain use of that currency, which is why it gets interesting how MMTers respond to a declining empire. Now, I bring all this up because this is what I mean, that like a lot of the left's funding structures and stuff were actually based off of assumptions of the same imperial relationship to the dollar that existed in the 90s and aughts going on in perpetuity, just somehow not doing, bad things, supposedly. I don't think that was possible. There a lot of MMPers have been waking up to this and like coming up with new theories, trying to figure out like coalitions of relative monetary sovereignty, et cetera, et cetera. I don't want to shit on them, but this was the dominant paradigm on the left, even from Marxists. And I quote there because these Marxists have like no relationship to historical Marxism in their economic theories. They will still say, for example, that because corporate revenues are really high, that profits are high. What are the revenues from? What are they from? They're from things like IP, whatever. You have a raw commodity that doesn't have an IP attached to it. Look at what happens to the profit rate.
They're running like they run the shit into the ground. That's what happens. They try and pump shit and then they blow it up. I mean, like, give an example, Vaughn. Like, look what's happened to Dungeons and Dragons, man. They fucking sunk that shit.
Oh yeah. Oh god, yeah.
That's like that. Like they had a cash cow there, right? Absolute cash cow. And then they were
now they're doing it to Magic the Gathering too. Actually,
they're going to go to court over Magic the Gathering. Like they're getting sued by their shareholders. I mean, it's getting serious. It's getting serious out there. So who even knows? But everything's become speculation. And now like there's just everything's gambling.
Yeah, it's not even like it's speculation in the dirtiest 19th century sense of the word at this point.
And gambling. I guess it's democratizing scamming. So now everybody can kind of like gamble. Everyone can insider trade now. You've got Kalshi. Like if your mate works in the toilets at the basketball court and hears them fixing a game, he can like give you a tip and you make some money. Oh, the Magic court case got dismissed. Sad.
That said, the backlash in its fan base will probably go similarly to D&D.
D&D, like nobody's buying that shit. They're like freaking. They ran the cat, but that's happening with loads of stuff. That's the enshittification. It's like they're desperate to make these short-term profits, and it works for a bit, but then they make the thing. They're so extractive, people just get fed up of it.
Yeah.
Like people aren't chumpy chumps completely, are they? They don't want to, especially now. People haven't got money to piss away on shit, do they?
I wonder what's going to happen to the OnlyFans market. Actually, really don't know.
I mean, there'll always be gooners. So
that's true.
Alcohol.
Although actually, alcohol's actually going down. So
alcohol's gooning is gonna. That's a. I mean, OnlyFans is already not like a great market. It's like a myth that everybody's making billions on OnlyFans. Like people, people are making no money on that, and like or like $100 or something. And it's like there's a flood.
Like everyone thought we were all making tons of money on podcasts and YouTube. And I can't get my day job. And I'm fairly successful as far as YouTubers go.
Yeah, no, I mean it's like so like. I don't know what the statistic is. I it's like 9 to 5. It's like most people aren't making like big money on OnlyFans. That's just like a manosphere fucking nonsense that they talk about. Like,
and it operates by power law. The people who are making the biggest money are making a ton.
Yeah,
like, and that was true here.
It's another K-shaped economy.
Yeah, it was true in in left podcast in the aught teens. I mean, because like. For every podcast where everyone got to retire to Silver Lake in their 30s, and they were pulling in $100,000 a month on Patreon, there were 50 that didn't make anything, and it is interesting about podcasts. Like if you look at the most popular podcast that are free, they're like right wing. If you look at the most popular podcasts that are paid, they are either neutral or left wing. It is a little interesting in that regard. Chapo, I don't think is no longer number one, but it's still up there. I just we kind of got off the topic of Iran because Iran is really bleak, and I don't think I'm talking about this early on, but I want to be very careful. I made a lot of stupid predictions in the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine war. Like I thought this would surely be over by now. I also thought the Ukrainians would realize that like the Americans didn't really care, that they were just a pawn in the situation with NATO. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. In fact, I also didn't really think Russia was going to do what they did. So I thought Biden was bullshitting.
Because it all seemed so crazy,
right? So I have gotten very careful about making predictions about highly volatile and complicated geopolitical situations, but I just do not. The one thing I will say is if people think, and by people I probably mean defenders of the current administration regime here, if people think that our current regime is just going to pull what they pulled in Venezuela and Iran, they are just, even if the government falls, it's not gonna go with just stability. I mean, actually, that would be a difference. If the government falls, that's different than what happened in Venezuela. But like, it's not gonna go the same way. But what it means beyond that, I don't know. I mean, I remember people telling me, well, like, Israel's legitimacy is done for. And I'm like, it just seems to me like legitimacy just doesn't matter anymore.
I mean, legitimacy to who? This is the cope. People think the good guys win in the end. They don't always. I mean, like, people believe in progress, but progress has stopped. Like we're at like the end. We're at the end of the end of the end of history now. Like it's all just like this is all just regurgitating shit from the 19th century, but with like AI and drones, right, and nuclear weapons. I mean, God help us. Like, if the Iran goes really bad and you have a wave of like 7 million refugees like fleeing into Europe, what the fuck's gonna happen then? Like,
or you have like regional wars break out and start coalescing. Like, that's a real. I don't think it's likely yet, but it's a real possibility, and that would also lead to hundreds of thousands of refugees flooding everywhere.
Like refugee, like yeah, it's like it could be. I mean, like it's like it's just so unpredictable. Like I think the main thing people need to know is like war is unpredictable in any case, but when a war begins, like for the Russians, where there was no kind of clear end game after like capture Kiev in like 5 days failed, right? You end up with like a war that just goes on and grinds on and grinds on and grinds on. In fact, in certain ways, because the Russians have nukes, it's going to grind on for even longer because no one can really get the killing blow in there. You can't push the Russians too hard. You have to push them just the right amount. But just the right amount doesn't win a war. But I'm surprised Ukraine hasn't collapsed so far. It's I mean, the Russians are chucking resources in there, and it does kind of expose the Russians as being kind of when people start freaking about Russia, like it's like, man, like the Russians just give the Poles nuclear weapons, and like they could probably stop them by themselves these days.
I don't want to think about the Poles with nuclear weapons. Never mind. I retract my everybody needs nuclear weapons here. But no, I mean, like, look, I think we need to. I think one of the things that we've been doing is we've been coasting on the nothing ever happens for a long time. Stuff is happening, and I've been wrong. Like, I thought, for example, surely this Trump administration was just doubling down on multipolarity, and we were just going to try to bully the hemispheres near us again. Apparently not. Apparently we're back to old style imperialism because we figured that we pulled Venezuela off successfully.
Yeah, I don't know where any of this goes, and I'm kind of surprised. I mean, like, I don't know, like, I just don't know what's going on anymore. like, don't ask me. It's just like everyone's kicking over the ant hills, and it's like nobody knows where the ants are going, and somebody accidentally kicked over the fire ants. I mean, like, seriously, people better hope that this fucking works, to be honest. Like, that peace breaks out and you have some kind of peaceful transition relatively quickly. It's not going to be just world or anything, but God, the alternatives are really quite terrifying. Like mass refugees, endless civil war, and like a bloodbath. That's not good, right? Like, ugh. I don't want to see that. I want to go visit Iran and have some food there. I don't want to see like, and there already, there's already so many people dead, and I don't want to just see like, and like, people need to also chill out. It's like, of course, significant portions of the Iranian population are going to be cheering this on, not just the psychotic diaspora, who are the Shahs, are some of the most mentally ill people out there. Like, there's truly, like, it's not just, it goes beyond just being like nationalist stuff. Like, they had an AI going around where they had like Reza Pahlavi, like, as the dude, the Spartan dude in 300. It's like, and it was unintentionally so good because, yeah, he's fighting against Iran, that movie. Totally nuts, people. They do not listen.
I hope it works, question mark. But that, Djene, means hope that this violence stays contained within this weekend. That's what he means.
Yeah, and it stops, and like, we don't have a freaking bloodbath. Like, I know it might be really cathartic for people to watch hundreds of thousands of I don't know, like missiles hitting Tel Aviv or American soldiers dying and stuff. Yeah, but like, who's doing a lot more fucking dying? Just normal people. And it's just like, it's very freaking easy to treat this stuff as a kind of sports, a sport in which you've got a side, and it's, people are legitimately should be angry about how this war has taken place. But man, it's not going to benefit anyone if it turns into a freaking bloodbath. It's just, and Iranians are going to be the ones who get killed. And just don't want that Shah person to turn up, like, shoot him to the moon. Is it going to happen? Probably not. I always prepare for the worst, as I say. I mean, like, how do you overthrow a government when you have a completely unpredictable bombing campaign? Like, who's going to go out into the yeah, the future is trench crusade. Who's going to go out into the streets to try and do anything when they might just get blown up by a missile?
Right, particularly when it's clear that they're not just targeting the regime, they're also targeting other factions of Iranian society. So, like, it's, yeah. I want to say this. Speaking of nothing ever happens, can we admit the libs are right and the 2016 election was the most consequential election of our lifetime? Sorta, yeah. I mean, one of the things that proved to me, even at the time, I have not been on the, like, on the oh my god Trump train as much as maybe I even should have been, to be quite honest. I will admit, people like Danny Besner had me somewhat convinced that some of the forces that constrained him in the first administration would be back in place. That was completely wrong. I think the combination of 2016 and then 2020 Biden being so anemic and the Democrats not really pursuing an agenda and not being able to unify around an agenda as clearly has had world historic consequences. And it's changed a lot of things and bought a lot of people time. Now, did the libs understand all that? I mean, the thing is, like, the libs themselves, I think it's true, have been saving themselves by, like, not doing anything, by using the threat of Trump as a cudgel. And who knows if they can do that indefinitely? I doubt it. Just like I doubt Keir Starmer is going to be long for this political world.
This nonsense, this like restorationalist, like get back to normal nonsense, is not working, and even the wine mums can see it. That's the problem, right? It's not even plausible.
So who knows where this is all going to go? one of the things I would also say is the libs are in a very the libs. I mean, you know, a lot of people who are like relatively normally Democrats, even during the resistance movement, they don't have the same faith that they used to have. You know, there's been real learning on the ground. It's been something that I have really thought a lot about and don't have a lot of answers to, and things are bad. I mean, and I also think though we're still in this situation where we were talking about somebody, you know, way back we were talking about this, and I'm going to wrap us up on this. We are now an hour and 5 minutes longer than I said I was going to go, but I think we're going to have to deal with the fact that like every faction has been kind of assuming the world didn't change a lot in the last 20 years. And that's not just for like Trump in America. It's also for like what we've seen. I mean, like Macron is hanging on by, you know, the fact that the French presidency has a hell of a lot of power. But also he has very little popular legitimacy there, and Mélenchon, and it's going to be a battle between Mélenchon and what's left of the Le Penites. And it looks like right now, if I was going to have money on it, I wouldn't be putting it on Mélenchon as much as I would like to. I don't think that's in the cards. We have also
because things are swinging so rapidly. You know, if you told me the Greens were going to win that by-election like 6 months ago, I'd be like, no way. Things are so unstable. Like it depends when the public are so fickle.
Yeah, and things are breaking. Like the public is fickle, but things are breaking, and that's like we could complain about the complacency of like the American public and the American left, and even well into the aughts. But like shit, kind of more or less worked. Now we're like trying to build an AI god because we can't figure out any other way out of our economic problems, and I'm serious about that. Right. You know, reshoring hasn't worked, and it's not happening. The conditions of reshoring are so unstable that no one wants to do it. You know, if you want to see a through train in Trump's action, it is to say you're going to do something and create such unstable conditions that no one trusts the ability for anyone to do it.
Nobody gets anything they want.
Right. And including the regime. Like, so it's, you know, and there are people who will cope and say, you know, and try to make it all fit together. Yeah, I banned one of them early on, and you know who they were. But anyway, what's in this now, because we've been kind of off topic, although we haven't been trading stories about drinking in the Middle East. I want to thank you all for watching. So I want to thank Djene for coming on, despite the fact he clearly has a cough.
I've been like this for like a month and a half, so don't worry about it. It's my new condition of life.
Oh well, that's probably Jean's gonna get more black pilled than Varn. Like I think you already are. I think it's actually fair to say that you already are.
How's my Witcher 3 playthrough? I haven't bought Witcher 2 yet. I haven't played it for like a week or so, but I skipped the Bloody Baron, and I'm now on Skellige. So that's where we are in The Witcher.
All right. I don't play video games except for like Terraria on my phone. So on that note,
bye, Von.
Bye, guys.